It started as an innocent Saturday dinner at my place, a gathering of friends to unwind after a long week. I had just moved into this charming little apartment downtown, and my excitement to show it off had reached a peak. The scent of garlic and lemon wafted through the air as I grilled some delicious veggie skewers and sautéed shrimp for those who weren't adhering to special diets. Among the group was Lisa, my close friend since college, who had recently identified as pescatarian after not touching red meat for years. I respected her choice, but I knew her habits could sometimes waver in social settings, especially with good food around. It was almost comical how she would swoon over my culinary decisions, her large brown eyes lighting up with excitement at each platter I presented. As the evening unfolded with laughter and wine, I watched her dive into the shrimp with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. It was amusing until it suddenly struck me, an unsettling thought, as if a fog had drifted into my usually clear mind. "Hey, Lisa," I said, attempting to tease her lightly, "you know if you eat that, you might as well wave goodbye to your pescatarian label." Everyone laughed, but I was only half joking. I could see the glimmer of guilt in her eyes flicker and fade as she popped another shrimp into her mouth. The atmosphere shifted slightly, we all resumed our chatter, but I could sense her internal struggle bubbling beneath the surface, like the tension of a taut string ready to snap. Eventually, the night made its inevitable descent into messy revelations, and we all plopped down on the couch, a few drinks in hand. That's when she admitted it. "You know," she began hesitantly, "sometimes, I wonder if I really want to be pescatarian. The way everyone went to town on your food tonight. I felt like I was missing out." It was clear that she was wrestling with herself. She'd always been passionate about her choice for ethical reasons, yet every time she encountered temptation, she felt more and more conflicted. I sighed, struggling with the gravity of what I was about to say. I didn't want to sound harsh, but the truth was nagging at me. "Look, Lisa," I started, choosing my words carefully, "it's your choice, and I respect it, you know that. But if you can't resist shrimp on occasion and it's giving you this much anxiety, maybe you need to reevaluate why you're doing it. It's okay to admit you want to enjoy food, even if it doesn't fit into one label or another." The room fell quiet, the air thickening with unspoken sentiment, and I could feel the weight of my statement sinking into my gut. I could read her face like a book: confusion, frustration, anger. She snapped back, "So, it's my fault I ate meat? Thanks for making me feel like a monster." That stung, more than I expected it would. I felt my heart race, a familiar surge of defensiveness rushing up like a wave. I didn't want to be the villain in her narrative. "No, that's not what I meant," I stammered, my voice softening. "I just think it's important to own our choices, you know? If you're really struggling, maybe it's time to rethink how rigid you want to be." My intentions glimmered under the weight of her hurt, and I regretted my delivery. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, she sighed deeply, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. "I guess. It just feels hard sometimes, navigating these choices in a world full of delicious foods. Maybe I need to reconsider how I label myself," she admitted, her voice quieter. I could sense we both were still processing. It was complicated, like a beautiful, messy tapestry of feelings engaged in an unresolvable dance. Later that night, as the remnants of our feast lay scattered around us and we finally drifted into lighter conversations again, I felt a poignant shift. I wasn't sure if my words had genuinely struck a chord, but something shifted in her demeanor. I realized that, in trying to signal her toward her own truth, I hadn't meant to reprimand her. Instead, it felt like we were both involved in a delicate dance of self-discovery, two friends navigating the overpowering waves of guilt and desire in a chaotic sea of culinary choices. Months later, I received a text from her. "Hey, started trying some new things in the kitchen too, like I'm experimenting with being less strict with my vegetarianism. Thanks for that night, really." I smiled at the screen, relieved. It reaffirmed something vital. We weren't just friends tossing around labels, we were evolving together, reshaping our identities and learning to embrace the shades of gray instead of the rigid divisions we'd created. It was early evening when I received that text, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting my living room a soft gold. I could feel the warmth wrap around me like a familiar blanket, but there was a strange intensity bubbling inside. I was relieved, yes, but a part of me couldn't help but gnaw on the edges of that moment. The weight of our past conversation lingered. I remembered how tense it had felt after she took that first bite of steak at the grill, the way her eyes widened in disbelief and almost guilt, like she'd broken an unspoken rule. "You know it's not just steak, right? It's about understanding our choices," I'd said, words spilling out before I caught myself. I felt like a counselor and a friend at once, grappling with my own frustrations about rigidity and rules in a friendship that should have room for exploration. That night, our laughter had mingled with the smoke from the grill, but the air had also been thick with an unaddressed tension. I found myself worrying how our culinary debate had left her feeling. Yet here she was now, admitting that she had begun playing with those rigid lines we once underlined so boldly. I felt a sense of pride wash over me, an unexpected warmth to see her moving past the guilt that had shadowed her for months. I typed back, careful yet upbeat, really? That's awesome. It's about what feels right for you, not what we think it should be. I hit send and slumped back into the couch, heart racing slightly. It reminded me of that old saying, to be true to oneself, but how hard it can be. I often struggled with that truth too and realized that questioning things, especially our choices in domains as personal and emotive as food, was not just a trait of culinary exploration, it was a manifestation of a larger conversation about identity. I glanced at my half-empty plate from dinner, the remnants of my own dietary decisions. I'd been having seafood, mostly, saving myself from the more unpalatable choice of red meat. Was it that different from her shift? Is it really just about the food, or is it about comfort in the chaos of adulthood, growing, bending, and reshaping ourselves? Days turned into weeks, and those philosophical inquiries played in my mind as background music, mingling with the sweet aroma of my kitchen experiments. I swiped through my social media later and saw her post, an impeccable plate of sautéed vegetables with shrimp, vibrant and mouthwatering. The caption read, "Just because I love plants doesn't mean I can't embrace a bit of the sea, right?" I chuckled, an involuntary sense of triumph swelling in my chest. She was molding her narrative and allowing the waves of culinary joy to drown out the self-imposed storms of guilt. It made me want to push my boundaries too. Perhaps I could venture into vegetarian dishes beyond my comfort zone. Somewhere in that back and forth of support and experimentation, we found ourselves interwoven, each dish a tile in a mosaic of our friendship. I realized that her choice, or the softening of her restrictions, didn't negatively impact our connection, it only deepened it. One weekend, we agreed to cook together again, a full few hours reserved for culinary exploration. As we diced and chopped, we talked freely, about our lives, our aspirations, the uncertainty swirling around us like the steam from the pans. By the time we tasted our third dish, the vulnerability we both carried transformed into a playful banter. "So if I make my famous crab cakes next week, can you handle the temptation?" she teased, and I couldn't help but throw my head back in laughter. Temptation? Oh, come on. I'll still be here, side by side, in this delicious gray zone, I replied. And suddenly, it felt less like a debate and more like exploration, a shared journey through choices seasoned with genuine care and understanding. I leaned on the counter, ready to whisk my hands into the next dish, feeling our friendship getting thicker, hearty like the meal we were about to create. Life is messy, and the lines are often blurred, but in that kitchen, amidst laughter and the inviting aroma of shared meals, I felt alive, truly, deeply alive. I couldn't predict the future, or if she'd return to a stricter vegetarian path, but I realized it hardly mattered. We were simply living, exploring, shaping ourselves with each meal shared, every step an invitation to experience the beautiful chaos together. That afternoon, with sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to my friend. As I set about chopping vegetables, bright peppers, fragrant garlic, and crisp spinach, I could practically sense her presence beside me. We had planned to conjure up a new recipe together. We called it Meal Assembly Gone Wild, an excuse to toss everything we had on hand into one big bowl and see what happened. It wasn't just about food, it was a metaphor for where we were in life, melding our separate journeys into something vibrant, unique, and delicious. Just as I reached for the onions, my thoughts drifted back to that fateful dinner months ago, when she had taken a forkful of the salmon, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is so good, but what if I regret it later?" she asked, laughter bubbling just under the surface of her conflicted expression. Now, with each clatter of the pan and splash of sauce, I realized we had both changed since that night. We had stepped away from rigid definitions and found invigorating freedom in playing with the rules. "Hey, maybe we could throw in some shrimp for a little kick?" I called out to her, eyebrows raised playfully. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the imaginary scales of her vegetarianism before nodding eagerly. "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And just like that, we tumbled deeper into our culinary exploration, an unwritten agreement forming in the air between us, that this space was safe for experimentation, for letting go, for embracing the pleasure of the unexpected. As the aromas mingled and enveloped us, rich and enticing, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, her smile wide as she mixed ingredients with wild abandon. It echoed the joyful spirit this journey had instilled in her. There was a new confidence in the way she moved, a contrast to the uncertainty that used to shroud her culinary choices. I felt proud, not just of our dish, but of her bravery to navigate the ambiguity of her identity. It felt like we both were adding layers to ourselves, new textures and flavors that complemented who we had always been at our core. "Do you think this would make a good post for the blog?" she asked, tossing a playful strand of hair over her shoulder. She loved sharing our culinary escapades online, a creative outlet that gave her an avenue to connect with others exploring similar paths. I nodded, grinning. "Absolutely. And we can call it Dancing with Delicacies, a pescatarian journey or something cheeky like that." Our laughter rang through the kitchen, warm and easy, a reminder that moments like these were worth cherishing. As we plated our creation, the vibrant colors inviting and bold, I felt a warmth blossom in my chest, a realization that this friendship had transformed into something richer than I ever anticipated. We had wandered outside the boundaries we once imposed on each other and found a deeper bond through the art of sharing meals. It was about honoring our individual choices while still celebrating every messy, beautiful meal we pulled together. Later, as we sank into the clinking of forks against plates, I took a moment to observe her. She was savoring each bite, letting flavors linger on her tongue as memories intertwined with our laughter. I suddenly felt the urge to share something, an acknowledgement of our journey, our vulnerability. "You know," I said, looking straight at her, "I didn't want to tell you how to feel about your food choices, but I did want you to know it was okay to explore. You remind me that life doesn't come wrapped up in neat packages." Her gaze softened, and after swallowing, she replied with a thoughtful nod. "And you remind me that it's okay to step beyond the labels we put on ourselves. This journey with you is exactly what I needed, to stop fearing the gray areas." Our conversation ebbed and flowed across the table just like the food, intertwining and rich. As we cleaned up, I reflected on how, for each forkful we took, it was more than just a fusion of flavors, it was a celebration of friendship, acceptance, and the beautiful mess of growing together. I didn't know where her culinary exploration would lead next or how her relationship with food and identity would continue to evolve, but I felt a sense of calm in the uncertainty. We were both learning to embrace the chaos and quirks of life without the need for rigid definitions, a true friendship woven tighter with every meal shared. I never imagined that losing weight would lead to me being in the middle of a workplace drama, but here I am, sharing my story, hoping to find some clarity. Just a few months ago, I was sitting in an office cubicle, feeling overwhelmed and self-conscious, my body holding on to extra pounds that I had come to accept as part of me. But after a serious health scare, I decided to get serious about my fitness. I spent countless hours in the gym, swapped fast food for salads, and traded late-night Netflix binges for evening runs. Gradually, the scales tipped in my favor, and before I knew it, I had shed nearly 30 pounds. With my newfound confidence, I felt ready to take on the world, or at least my job at the marketing agency. As my clothes started to feel comically oversized, I figured I could do something nice with them. Enter Jenna, one of my coworkers who had been struggling with her own weight issues. We had shared a few conversations where she spoke about her desire to lose weight but was struggling to find motivation. One afternoon, as we sipped our afternoon coffees, I jokingly offered her some of my old clothes, their vibrant colors ready to be appreciated by someone who needed a confidence boost. Her initial reaction was laughter, and she brushed off the idea, but I could see a flicker of interest in her eyes. It felt good to offer her a lifeline, a way to feel better about herself without the financial burden of new clothes. However, I didn't anticipate the controversy it would stir. The next day, I approached her again, this time presenting a neatly folded pile of blouses and blazers from my closet. "I really think you'd look great in these," I said, feeling a bit sheepish but genuinely hoping to help. But then, her face fell. "I appreciate the thought, but I really don't want your hand-me-downs," she replied, her voice tight. I felt my heart sink. I was only trying to be helpful. But Jenna's discomfort didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started to notice a shift in our interactions. She became distant, not just with me but with the whole team, as if the mere act of my offering had changed the energy in the room. I found myself questioning everything. Did I overstep? Was I the insensitive jerk that some pieces of the office gossip suggested? I thought things were innocent enough. I only wanted to share some clothes that I wasn't using. Days turned into weeks, and all our mutual acquaintances began commenting, whispering about my offer that had supposedly hurt Jenna's feelings. Each time I heard someone mention it, I felt a sting of regret, swirling like a storm in my gut. I wanted to reach out again, to clarify and apologize, but whenever I saw her in the break room, my heart raced, and I clamped my mouth shut. I worried about being seen as the villain instead of the supportive coworker I aimed to be. My stomach ached, and I felt all the confidence I had gained slowly begin to slip away. Finally, after a particularly tough week where the tension was palpable in the air, I decided enough was enough. I needed closure, not for my sake but for Jenna's too. I invited her for coffee, just the two of us. I took a deep breath, my heart drumming loudly as I sat across from her. "Jenna, I'm genuinely sorry if I crossed a line. I only wanted to help." She looked at me with this mixture of sadness and frustration, and for a moment, silence filled the space between us. Then she spoke, softer than I expected. "It's just, I've been struggling, you know? And being offered clothes when I already feel like a failure?" It felt like I was being given a reminder of everything I didn't achieve. As those words sank in, I realized that my intentions, no matter how good, had missed the mark entirely. After our talk, a weight lifted, and I could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. We hadn't solved anything major that day, but we were able to at least acknowledge the issues around our insecurities and how they intertwined with our friendship. I promised myself to be more careful moving forward, knowing that sometimes, a helping hand can accidentally feel like a shove. As I walked back to my desk, a thought struck me: maybe we can't fix everything, but we can be honest about our feelings. I hoped this wasn't the end for Jenna and me but instead the beginning of a more genuine connection. A few weeks later, while cleaning out my closet again, I thought of her. I held onto those clothes but not out of guilt or as a reminder of my past, but as a nod to the complicated yet beautiful ways our paths crossed, forever reminding me to tread more gently in such delicate situations. The thoughts of Jenna lingered in my mind like the lingering scent of fading perfume, the good kind, the kind that brings back warmth rather than sadness. I spent the next few weeks navigating the delicate balance of our workplace dynamic. Each time I caught a glimpse of her, I felt a tug in my chest. She was becoming more than just a coworker, she was a reminder of empathy and understanding, the raw connection that can emerge from vulnerability. I remember one afternoon, I noticed Jenna in the break room, her shoulders slumped slightly as she stirred her coffee, lost in thought. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure if I should join her or give her space. But something nudged me forward, a quiet urge to ask, so I did. "Hey, you okay?" I ventured, my voice softer than I intended, slightly tinged with concern. Jenna looked up, surprise flickering across her face before she managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired, you know?" she replied, but I could see the walls still standing. Instead of prying, I settled into a nearby chair, and we exchanged small talk, laughing about mundane things, each joke momentarily peeling back layers of her guarded demeanor. It felt good, like we were slowly weaving a new tapestry of friendship, a new bond built on honesty rather than the remnants of misunderstanding. Then one evening, as I sat on my bed staring at the growing mountain of clothes I had set aside for donation, a sudden urge overcame me. Maybe, just maybe, I could offer some of them to Jenna. I gathered a few pieces that I thought would suit her style, things I had loved, but now felt like remnants of someone else's life. I imagined her face lighting up as she tried them on, the tentative joy mirrored in her appreciative smile. But the moment I sealed that bag, doubt snuck in like a cold breeze through an open window. What if she took it the wrong way? What if it reminded her of her own struggles with weight and self-acceptance? The very last thing I wanted was for her to feel any sense of embarrassment or inadequacy. Still, I made a decision. I wouldn't let fear steer me clear of taking a chance to show kindness. The next day at work, I approached her after a meeting, heart racing as I felt the weight of the garment bag in my hands. "Hey, Jenna, do you have a minute?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked curious but cautious, and as I revealed the bag, I could practically see the gears turning in her mind. "These are some clothes I thought you might like. If you want them, great, if not, that's perfectly okay, too." Her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and uncertainty flashing across her face. I watched her expression closely, fearing I'd overstepped. To my relief, she took a small step forward, reaching out to touch the fabric. "Really? You'd part with these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and something about the vulnerability in her tone struck me. Here was someone who was beginning to peel back her own layers of insecurity, too. We spent a few moments going through the bag together. I noticed the way her nervous fingers grazed over the fabric, and I smiled when she found a favorite piece, an old cardigan I used to wear constantly. "This is really cute," she said, holding it up to her frame, and for the first time, I saw her smile genuinely, unfettered by her worries, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. Our conversation soon drifted to our shared experiences of battling our own reflections, and I could feel the barriers crumbling even further. She told me about her struggles with body image, and I found myself opening up about mine, an unexpected weight lifting as I articulated feelings I had kept bottled inside for years. But what surprised me most was the raw understanding that rippled between us, the way it felt like we were both navigating a path through the shadows of our past. When we parted that day, I had a flicker of hope in my chest, a small, glowing ember signaling that yes, maybe I hadn't messed things up completely with Jenna after all. Instead, perhaps we were finding something much stronger together, a connection that embraced our imperfections and uncertainties. A couple of weeks passed, and I noticed how our conversations deepened. Each friendly exchange, each shared laugh unfurled layers of kindness that illuminated our workdays. Eventually, I received a text from her late one evening, simple but profound. "Thank you for being so understanding, and for the clothes. Your kindness means more than you know." Reading those words, I felt a rush of warmth envelop me. This journey, still unfolding between us, had become something meaningful. Sometimes, I still catch myself reminiscing about Jenna and that moment in the break room, the moment that nudged me to embrace vulnerability and break down the walls we so often put up in our lives. Our paths intertwined beautifully, weaving a friendship rooted not just in shared experiences, but in the profound honesty of our journeys. I realized then that perhaps the greatest gift you can give someone isn't just your support, but also the chance to embrace their own story alongside yours. As for my closet, it remains a mixture of memories and reminders, each piece a testament to the bonds we form when we tread gently on the paths of others, opening ourselves to understanding and connection along the way. This newfound sense of understanding hung over me like a warm blanket, enriching my days at work. I felt lighter, not just from my physical transformation, but emotionally, too. Jenna and I launched into a friendship that surprised both of us. Lunchtime became a ritual of laughter and sharing secrets, the kind of bond that offers solace amidst the mundane. I even found myself looking forward to those small, fleeting moments, a shared joke, her eyes sparkling with mischief, or the way she'd roll her eyes but crack a smile when I made a goofy remark. That's what friendship can do. It nourishes you, fills the empty spaces in your heart that you didn't even know were there. But then came the day I noticed Jenna's mood shift. It was subtle at first, like a storm brewing in the distance. She would stare at her phone during lunch, her fingers curling and uncurling as if memorizing a dance routine she was suddenly unsure of. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, that familiar twinge of empathy reminding me how little the surface can reveal. One afternoon, as we sat surrounded by the usual office chatter, I decided, no, I needed to broach the subject. "Hey, what's going on? You've been a little off lately." I tried to sound casual, but even I could hear the concern lacing my voice. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face like the shadow of clouds passing by. "It's nothing," she said, but her eyes told a different story. I sat still, not pressing but letting the silence wrap around us, allowing her to find her own words. She hesitated, glancing down at her untouched salad. "I applied for a promotion and didn't get it. I thought I had a good chance." The vulnerability in her voice pierced through layers of practiced indifference. I remembered what it felt like to crave validation in a world that often seemed indifferent, a feeling we shared despite our stark differences. "I'm really sorry to hear that," I said softly. "I know how hard you worked for it. Just know that your talent and hard work don't go unnoticed." A small smile tugged at her lips, grateful yet fragile. As we exchanged words, the truth seeped in. Rejection had its own sting, one that could echo far beyond the workplace. Without really planning it, I felt myself bridging the gap that fear had created. "You know, I still have those clothes I was telling you about. While they aren't a magic solution, I thought maybe you'd want to try them." "They're just sitting there," I offered, hoping it wouldn't feel like pity. To my surprise, Jenna's brows furrowed, confusion coating her features. "You sure that's okay? I mean, they were yours." "Of course," I said, the conviction sweeping through me. "It would mean a lot to see them put to good use. Besides, they're like a little part of our journey here, right?" We stared at each other, a silent exchange deepening our connection even further. I saw her recognizing the hope within the gesture, the warmth of shared vulnerability transforming an old wound into something beautifully resonant. Later that week, I brought the clothes to her. When she opened the bag, eyes wide with surprise mingling with appreciation, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Each piece she tried on revealed not just fabric on skin, but also a layer of strength hidden beneath the seams of doubt. It was a miniature celebration, two friends standing tall in their stories, side by side. Jenna ended up wearing one of the old jackets the next week, my favorite one, paired with confidence that felt new yet familiar, a striking reflection of the growth we both were navigating. That day marked a turning point, not just in how we shared our journeys, but in understanding what it means to lean on each other, to give without losing a piece of yourself. Looking back now, reflecting on that chaotic but beautiful year with Jenna, I realize it's less about what we lose in life and more about what we find when we share. Each moment is a thread in the tapestry of relationships, connecting us in ways we can't always see. It has taught me that every experience, be it joyful or heartbreaking, carries the potential to interlace our lives in profound ways we can never fully understand. And as I gaze into my closet now, each piece still stands as a memory, a promise that there's always space for understanding and compassion, anchored firmly in the bond we chose to foster between us. I still remember the moment it all shifted for us. It was a Friday evening about a year ago when my husband Mark had that accident at work, an industrial mishap that left him with severe injuries and a scattering of medical equipment that now defined our home. I used to think I understood what love and partnership meant, but standing in our living room surrounded by bedside tables laden with an oxygen tank and other gadgets was a stark wake-up call. At first, I poured all of my energy into being his caretaker. I learned to check his machines, set up appointments, and manage medications, all while juggling my job and trying to maintain some semblance of our previous life. But as time blurred the lines between being a partner and a caretaker, I began to feel resentful. I could attribute this weight to many factors: anxiety about his health, the fear of losing the man I loved, and the nagging feeling that my own needs were fading into oblivion. When Mark mentioned that I should take over his daily routines with the equipment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the stress or the fatigue, it was fear of losing myself in this role forever. The argument began softly, a simple question about battery replacements for his nebulizer, and before I knew it, we were shouting. "Why can't you just take care of your equipment like an adult?" I blurted out in anger, each word dripping with frustration and a hint of betrayal. "I didn't sign up for this, Mark. I didn't ask for a second job." The look on his face was heartbreaking, hurt and confusion dancing in his eyes. In that moment, I saw the truth in his silence. I might be pulling away, but he felt more trapped than ever. The emotional distance between us grew palpable, a chasm forged by my unwillingness to shoulder everything. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "I didn't want any of this to happen either, but I need you." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of our unspoken fears. I felt a rush of shame rolling over me at how my vulnerability came across. Was I the villain for wanting to step back or the victim of our circumstances? In the stillness that followed, I knew something had to change in how I handled the situation. I sat by the window later that night, listening to the distant sounds of life moving on outside while our little world felt suffocated by tubes and equipment. I needed to communicate, really communicate, about what I could handle versus where I felt frozen. It took time, but we found a way to talk it through, albeit imperfectly, acknowledging that my refusal wasn't about not wanting to help him but rather about taking care of myself too. So, I set boundaries, and he agreed to look into hiring a home health aide part-time. It was a delicate balance. I still aimed to support him, but I also stepped back enough to breathe. We've learned to navigate this uncharted territory together, even if the scars of that argument linger in the back of my mind. It isn't easy. But love, as it turns out, isn't just about caring for the other person, it's also about caring for oneself in the process. An update? Well, life is still a work in progress. We're still figuring things out, but we're trying to carve moments for just us, no equipment, just conversation, laughter, and the occasional silence that feels comforting rather than suffocating. It's strange how the mundanity of everyday life can intersect with the weight of profound change. Since that argument, I've found myself paying close attention to the little things, like the fresh scent of rosemary wafting from the oven as I cooked his favorite dish, or the way sunlight filtered through the curtains during our rare lazy mornings. I can still feel the tension wrapped around us like an unwelcome shroud, but I also sense the inertia of our relationship shifting, like a ship gradually correcting its course after a storm. One evening, we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV providing a backdrop to our quiet moment. I had just poured 2 glasses of wine, the Merlot colored deep as that lingering tension, when he turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking. about how this whole mess with my health has affected us. My heart dropped at the words affected us because that phrase had become our elephant in the room. I don't want our love to feel like a burden to you, he continued, looking down at his hands, the ones that once felt so steady and strong. I could see the uncertainty etched in his brow, the shame that sometimes reared its head when we talked about his illness. Honestly, it has at times, I responded, trying to keep my tone even, though I could feel the stirrings of something that resembled guilt knotting my stomach. But it's not just you, you know? I sighed, searching for the right words. I felt lost, too, especially when I realize I can't take on everything. I want to support you, but I also need to take care of myself. A silence hung between us, heavy yet necessary, a moment where we were both just being. I thought about all those nights I had spent tiptoeing around his equipment, the sterile tubes and circuits that had invaded our space, feeling like guests in our own home. I get that, he finally murmured, lifting his gaze to meet mine, a flickering of understanding passing between us. It makes sense that you'd feel overwhelmed. I do, too. Sometimes, I wish I could just be normal. His admission stung, that longing for normalcy in a life where we had built a new reality marked by appointments and equipment. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his, letting the warmth travel up my arm. But we're not normal. Not anymore, and maybe that's okay. Over the next few weeks, we began to talk more openly, not just about his health but about what we wanted for ourselves and each other. We made it a point to have designated unplugged days where we left the medical equipment in the closet and focused solely on each other. We went for walks in the nearby park, shared dinners at our favorite restaurants, and rediscovered our shared love for board games. Each laugh felt like a reminder that we had not lost ourselves to this struggle, even if we were forever changed by it. While the scars of our past arguments still lingered, they transformed into shared reminders of how fragile yet resilient we could be. An update? Life continues to be a roller coaster, but we have learned to embrace the ride together, feeling every rise and fall with newfound appreciation. So yes, we're still navigating our way through this uncharted territory, but now, we do so hand in hand, finding joy in the mundane and strength in each other. And perhaps that sense of acceptance, of our transformed normal, is the truest expression of our love. As days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more on what it means to love someone who's facing health challenges while simultaneously learning to advocate for my own needs. I remember one quiet evening, the golden light of sunset spilling through the window, casting a warm glow across our cluttered living room littered with medical gear, the weight of everything settling heavily on my shoulders. It was one of those rare moments when we weren't talking about his health, but just sipping tea and listening to the sound of the kettle cooling down. It struck me that while I had learned to support him, I had also unintentionally built a little fortress around my own needs. I'd made my world so centered on him that I'd lost sight of my own joys. That realization felt like a weight lifting, but also a burden, like I was admitting to myself that I needed more than just being a caretaker. One night, after finishing a long day at work, I mustered the courage to bring it up during dinner. "Can we talk about something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He looked up from his plate, his fork paused mid-air, concern etched on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The care in his eyes reassured me, urging me forward. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this." I gestured to the various medical items around the table. "I still love you, but some days, just being your caregiver feels like it's consuming me." He nodded, seemingly absorbing my words. "I thought you might be feeling that. I've noticed you've been quieter lately." A softness came over him, a recognition of my struggle that felt validating yet daunting. I took a deep breath, appreciating his understanding rather than defensiveness. "I don't want to be resentful. I want to be better." That's when he surprised me. "You have every right to feel the way you do. We're in this together, but you shouldn't feel like you have to shoulder everything. I mean, when was the last time we had a proper date? Just you and me?" His question lingered in the air, filled with possibilities. And from that simple inquiry, we started to carve out our us time in the chaos. It wasn't easy at first. The weight of that equipment always loomed over us, an uninvited guest in our plans. But we began to reclaim joy in small ways, an old movie marathon on the couch, board games that turned into laughter-filled evenings, and stargazing trips that fostered whispered dreams and sweet nothings. I'd find him in the kitchen trying out a new recipe or curled up with a book, making an effort to fill his own time unconditionally, which helped me to see the parts of him that existed beyond the illness. Still, I won't pretend there were no rough patches. Just last week, he struggled with a particularly tough day, and all my reminders to find joy seemed to slip away like sand through our fingers. I was tired, and the burden of his despair felt heavier than the mechanical equipment we'd come to know so well. I felt anger bubbling again, the situation feeling all too familiar, and I had to remind myself that it was okay to feel frustrated. I didn't want to retreat, but I also didn't want to be overwhelmed. It was during those moments that we both had to remember the tender balance of offering support while keeping our individual selves afloat. As we worked through those days, something shifted profoundly between us. Conversations weren't just about sharing burdens anymore, they became a space for authenticity. We learned that our love had to include vulnerability, not just in our struggles, but also in our triumphs and the mundane comfort of each other's company. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that it's okay to wobble and not always have it together, as long as we keep showing up for one another. We're not perfect, nor do we expect to be, but we're navigating with purpose, creating memories woven from resilience, laughter, and a shared commitment to honor our journey. Every step feels like we're writing not just a love story but also the tale of our growth and healing, together. I never thought sharing a house with 3 other people would lead to such a mess of feelings and moral questions, but here we are. I, a 30-year-old graphic designer, moved in with 2 friends and 1 boyfriend who somehow became part of this tight living situation. Let's call them Sarah, Tom, and Lucas. The dynamic worked most of the time, but when Lucas started getting comfy, I felt a shift. I'd catch him lounging on the couch, flicking through channels and eating our snacks. Sure, he was with Sarah, but it was like the boundaries began to blur between friendship and just having a roommate with coupled privileges. A week ago, Lucas asked if he could borrow my car to go to a job interview he'd been prepping for. Now, usually, I wouldn't mind, I want the guy to succeed. But I'd just spent a fortune on car repairs because my last borrower didn't think a simple flat tire needed more than a can of fix-a-flat. I hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of conflict bearing down on me. Look, I can give you my bike, and it's only a couple of miles to the office, I suggested, trying to be reasonable. He laughed, like I was joking, but my frustration brewed. I didn't think it was fair to risk my car after everything I'd recently put into it. I told him no. The tension in the air was thick as he mulled over my refusal. I could see him processing, disappointment washing over his face, but I held my ground. The day of the interview came, and the moment I stepped out to grab coffee, I saw him pacing in the living room, barely able to contain his anxiety. "Can I at least use the bike?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. My stomach churned. I felt guilty, knowing how badly he wanted this job, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let another person risk my livelihood for a short-term solution to a long-standing worry. "I really can't, Lucas," I replied softly, and I could see the energy in the room dim. When he called me hours later to tell me he missed the interview because he couldn't get there without my car, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that my choice to protect my property had come without troublesome consequences, at least on my end, but guilt because I could practically hear the resignation in his voice. I spent the rest of the day questioning if I was an asshole for prioritizing my car over someone else's future. Should I have been more understanding? As I sat there in a quiet house that night, I realized that life in this house wasn't going to get any clearer, and maybe that was okay. We were all in this nebulous state of budding adulthood, trying to navigate friendships, relationships, and responsibilities. A few days later, Lucas came home and announced he found another interview opportunity, this time without the expectation of using my car. I smiled for him, but it didn't erase the bittersweet taste of how our previous encounter had shaped things. There were a million small choices that made this life complicated, and sometimes, it seemed, the hardest ones were the ones nobody saw. So, maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe I just was someone trying to protect what little I had while hoping everyone else found their way in this messy, expectedly chaotic era of life. As the days blurred into weeks, I watched Lucas navigate the hectic world of job hunting, his determination sometimes leaving me in awe. I'd casually ask him how his applications were going while simultaneously trying to not overstep my boundaries as a roommate. He often consulting his girlfriend, Jess, about the roles he was interested in, their excitement filling the apartment whenever he'd get a call for a phone interview. I couldn't blame him, either. They were young, filled with dreams, and yet, the bitterness from our previous encounter still festered in the background of my mind. I kept replaying that day, the heated exchange, the way my resolve had crumbled as I struggled to stand my ground. Was I selfish for wanting to keep my car safe from wear and tear? For wanting to create a buffer between my possessions and the unpredictable chaos of other people's lives? I found myself wrestling with a kind of guilt that felt inexplicably heavy. It wasn't until one late afternoon, after a grueling day at work engulfed in stress, that it all boiled over again. Jess came home in tears, her mascara smudged, voice cracking as she revealed Lucas hadn't gotten the job he'd pinned all his hopes on. It echoed in the hallway, and my heart sank. I could see Jess's heart shattering, and for a moment, I felt a pang of disdain towards myself. What did I even know about other people's struggles? Day after day, I had cautiously guarded my little world, but at what cost? I was a fortress, standing firm against the emotional weathering of others, and yet, here was proof that sometimes that weather could be brutal. I offered my usual platitudes, "I'm sure something else will come up, and it's not the end of the world," while inwardly questioning if I should have been more supportive. Jess, grabbing a handful of napkins and wiping her tears, looked at me like she was inching closer to needing someone to blame. That flicker in her eyes felt unmistakable, a subtle accusation hiding behind the sorrow. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs as I tried to quell the rising tide of emotions. "I know this is hard, but Lucas gave it his all," I finally said, my heart racing as I dared to speak. Jess nodded, managing a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After she had left to meet Lucas for a pep talk, I sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of my decisions again. It hit me like a freight train. I had made my choices, but it wasn't Lucas or Jess who'd pushed me into this position. I was stuck in that gray space between self-preservation and the need to support friends. Would I always feel like this? The next couple of days were filled with the gentle reminder of life moving forward, despite my tumultuous thoughts. Lucas stayed mostly quiet after his setback, and I wondered if my reluctance to share my car had carved a distance between us that felt harsh and unyielding. Would things have been different if I'd just let him borrow it? Would he have felt less like he was trying to walk a tightrope? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I finally gathered enough courage one evening. "Hey, Lucas," I said, my voice hesitant as he sat at the dining table sifting through job listings, his brows knitted in concentration. "I've been thinking about the car. If you really need it for the next interview, you can use it." He looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude on his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded, both relieved and terrified, feeling an almost physical ache in my gut. "Yeah, I trust you." After a long, pregnant pause, he smiled, a genuine light sparking in his eyes again. "Thanks. I'll be careful, I promise." And just like that, with a simple act, a layer of tension lifted from the apartment. It was as if we had both taken a step forward, not just him, but me too. We had to navigate this chaotic time together, reminding ourselves that sometimes you have to release control to create space for others. I had to let go of the guilt and the fear that I was doing everything wrong. Life, I realized, was messy and unpredictable, but maybe that's what made it worth living. Moments turned to memories, and sometimes, being a little vulnerable along the way was the best way to build the connections that mattered most. I hoped that this new chapter would see us become more than just tenants sharing a roof. Perhaps we could spark a friendship that stood stronger than the steel and rubber of any car. As Lucas prepared for the interview, I hugged the thought of growth tightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism about navigating this messy era that stretched before us. A week passed, and the tension in our apartment began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Lucas was more upbeat, a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. He'd opened up about his experiences in getting to know the companies he was applying to, the kind of exciting roles he envisioned for himself, and I found myself rooting for him, hoping he would land something that truly excited him. There was an early morning when we found ourselves sharing coffee in our mismatched mugs, his chipped blue one, a gift from his mom, and my plain white one. We laughed about the terrible dinners we'd relied on during our school days, the microwavable mac and cheese that tasted like cardboard, and the countless times we learned that cooking was a science best left to someone else. "I seriously thought I'd never get through that phase without burning myself," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair as the sunlight streamed through our tiny kitchen window. And just like that, we were trading stories, our laughter bouncing off the walls where silence had lingered too long. It was refreshing, and I thought to myself, this is how you build friendships, brick by brick, shared moments by shared moments. Then the call came. I was in my room, trying to focus on laundry when Lucas burst through my door, an energy that surged through him so contagious I couldn't help but grin. "I got it," he exclaimed, holding his phone triumphantly aloft like a victory flag. My heart swelled as I registered the joy in his eyes. He was excited about starting this new chapter, and by extension, so was I, there was something undeniably uplifting about watching someone else chase their dreams. But as he filled the space around us with excitement, I felt an all too familiar wave of doubt wash over me. I wondered if I had done enough to support him. Should I have lent him my car despite my hesitations? What if he had shown me just a bit more appreciation? I was conflicted. Supporting your friends feels like a slippery slope sometimes, and I had been trying so hard to put myself first. Later that evening, I sat alone on our balcony, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars against the velvet night sky. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the open door while the hum of laughter faintly echoed from inside. Lucas was celebrating with our other roommate, Maria, who had baked a cake for the occasion, chocolate, of course, his favorite. As I listened to their joyous banter, I felt a pang of loneliness creep in. The moment felt profound, a celebration of dreams met with the bittersweet taste of my own insecurities. "I'm here, you know," I murmured to the night, unsure of who I was addressing. Would saying it out loud somehow reaffirm my worth, reclaim my decision? But another part of me echoed the doubts. Would I always prioritize my needs over his? Maybe there was a balance to be found, a compromise that allowed both of us to thrive without sacrificing our own boundaries. That night, after the cake was devoured and the laughter subsided, I finally gathered the courage to open up during one of our late-night talks. "Hey, Lucas," I started carefully, "I'm really proud of you for nailing that interview. But can I be honest?" He leaned in, curious. "I still wonder about that day. I know I seemed like a jerk for not letting you use my car, and I just want you to know. It was hard for me to say no." I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "I get it. It was a tough situation for both of us. You were looking out for yourself, and that's okay. We've all got our own battles, right?" That simple statement illuminated something vital. Self-advocacy was not only allowed but also necessary in a world where everyone tried to balance their dreams against the pressures life handed them. I smiled, a warm surge of relief washing over me. My heart felt lighter, and in that moment, the notion of friendship began to reshape. From roommates to allies, navigating an uncertain world together felt less daunting now. Maybe this chapter would take time to unfold completely, and maybe the past would echo, but beneath it all, we were learning. Not just about each other but about ourselves, about accountability, support, and the nuances of trust. It was an ongoing journey, and while I couldn't predict where it would lead us, this felt like the beginning of something beautiful. So, I took a breath, let the hope settle in, and thought maybe, just maybe, we all could find our way, one step at a time. I never thought I'd find myself in a family feud over something that feels so trivial at first glance, but here we are. My sister, Laura, called me last week in a panic. She had just bought a new house, and her renovations were taking longer than expected. She was supposed to host her kids' school festival this weekend, but the space was chaos, walls torn down, dust everywhere, and a non-functioning kitchen. She asked if I could let her 2 kids, Josh and Ava, stay in my spare bedroom until the work was done. Instinctively, my heart sank. It's not that I don't love my niece and nephew, I do, but my home is my sanctuary, and I've carved out that spare room as a personal refuge from my crammed work schedule and the demands of city life. It's where I unwind after long days, my only corner of peace. I thought about how my walls are adorned with my quirky posters and string lights that give me comfort, and how I've arranged everything to suit my tastes. When I tried to explain this to Laura, she didn't take it well. "They're just kids," she snapped, her voice rising through the phone. "They can't just be packed into the living room. They need their space, and this is your chance to help out." I felt bad, really, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the bigger picture was being overlooked. I told her I needed to think about it, but I could sense the disappointment in her tone. The following days felt heavy, filled with guilt and an uneasy weight of familial obligation. I kept imagining Josh's disappointment and Ava's big brown eyes, but I also imagined losing my peace. I ended up texting Laura the next day, gently declining. It's not like I offered her any alternative. "I can help with the kids during the festival, maybe take them out for ice cream afterward," I added. Her response came quick, laced with irritation. "Whatever. I'm just a little surprised you'd choose a room over your family." I tucked my phone away, feeling small in that moment. I spent the better part of the rest of the week trying to let go of the hurt I felt. I was the bad guy in this situation, and the texts from family members didn't help. My mom chimed in, reminding me how hard Laura always worked and that I shouldn't make things more difficult for her. I found myself second-guessing my decision, wondering if I had been selfish. Yet, beneath all the turmoil, I clung to my choice. I had to protect my own mental health. The festival weekend rolled around, and I offered to help out, but I was still walking the line of tension with my sister. Watching Laura attempt to juggle her kids and her new home made me feel more sympathy for her than I ever expected. When I finally saw them that Saturday, a part of me wished I had offered the room, but another part of me found a kind of serenity in knowing where my limits lay. I was fulfilling my role as an aunt, just not in the way everyone expected. It feels like a tug-of-war sometimes, love versus boundary setting, but maybe there lies the beauty of it all. And honestly, I think we all need a little more of that in our lives, don't we? As for my niece and nephew, they seemed to find joy at the festival without a hitch. They were laughing, running around, and for a brief moment, I felt relieved. Perhaps it was just a lesson learned, a reminder that sometimes, love means understanding and supporting your family while still honoring your own needs. As for an update? Well, I think things are slowly mending. I called Laura last night, and we talked things over. It wasn't easy, but we finally came to an understanding. I admitted the anxiety made me hesitant, and she apologized for snapping. In the end, I think we both learned that love can be messy, but it doesn't have to mean sacrificing our own sanctuaries. It's about managing priorities, and while I cherish my sister and her kids, I also cherish my own space. After that phone call with Laura, I decided to take a walk around my neighborhood. The familiar crunch of leaves under my sneakers and the crisp autumn air felt comforting against the backdrop of the somewhat emotionally charged night we just had. I had always found solace in wandering the streets of my suburban enclave, the oversized trees lining either side standing like guardians to my thoughts. Each step helped me process everything that had happened, not just the recent flare-up but also the complex relationship I shared with my sister and her family. The friction between us had become palpable in recent months, like a fire that had been smoldering quietly until it flared up unexpectedly. Laura had always been the more spontaneous one, the sister who took risks. Meanwhile, I'd prided myself on being a creature of comfort, the one who thrived on routine. I imagined her one-room apartment stuffed with toys and papers strewn everywhere, a chaotic ecosystem ruled by her kids, and then there was my bedroom, my sanctuary uniquely reflecting my taste, my quiet. As I walked along the streets, I wondered if that's where our disconnect began. I adored my niece and nephew, they were vibrant little beings full of life, but the thought of giving up my space, my sacred bubble, felt as absurd as inviting a gust of wind into my carefully curated home. I repeated to myself that no, I didn't have to risk my comfort to be a good aunt. Yet guilt gnawed at me. Was I being selfish? I could almost hear the whispers of what people would say as I took my seat at the dinner table during family gatherings. There was that auteur aunt, too rigid to accommodate her own blood. So many thoughts swirled in my head until I finally stopped by my favorite cafe. The charming little place, with its uneven wooden tables and the smell of fresh pastries wafting through open windows, always made me feel at home. I ordered my regular cappuccino, its warmth pressing against my palms, even its foam felt like a hug. And just then, I glanced out the window and saw a mother with her two children, one tugging at her hand too. Hurry to the playground while the other balanced artfully on a scooter. They laughed and shouted, and before I could stop myself, I smiled, recalling moments I'd spent with my niece and nephew, their giggles ringing through the air like wind chimes. I often wished I could magically harness that laughter and ease, to bring it into my home without a loss of autonomy. My thoughts drifted to Laura's frantic phone call the day before, her shaky voice revealing her own fears of not being enough for her kids, trying to balance a demanding job with parenting. I realized then that our conflict was deeper than our simple disagreement about living arrangements. It was about her feeling stretched thin, and me standing firm as a solid rock, refusing to bend. Here I was, a bystander reflecting on how it felt to protect my boundaries, while she was in the middle of a tempest, grappling to keep everything together. With steam rising from my mug, I pulled out my phone and typed her a quick message. Hey, just wanted to say again that I love you guys. We're going to figure this out, together? When you need help, with the kids or otherwise, count on me. It was simple, but I hoped it conveyed sincerity. I hit send and found myself optimistic about the possibilities, how love could exist within our shared imperfections. As the sky turned deeper blue with hints of twilight, a thought struck me. Perhaps I could offer my space for short stays and weekends, not for them to fully reside in, but a place for escapades when they needed a break. It could be a retreat, somewhere they could enjoy little adventures, while I didn't lose my haven completely. This idea fluttered around in my mind like a butterfly, transforming my initial sense of loss into a feeling of expansion. In the days that followed, I shared this idea with Laura, and to my surprise, she loved it. Our conversations gradually evolved into brainstorming family weekends, and with it, came brighter days. Sometimes there would be raucous bedtime stories filled with laughter and chaos, other times, quiet moments where we simply enjoyed each other's company. It wasn't just about sharing my space anymore, it was about sharing our lives, redefining what it meant to support each other while still establishing boundaries. So, here I am, sitting on my bed as I write this, refreshed by the recent turn of events. My initial discomfort feels increasingly like a distant memory, replaced by a new rhythm that still honors my sanctuary. I think about how love can be both firm and flexible, like a seasoned tree bending gently in the wind rather than breaking. Family isn't a matter of zero-sum, rather, it's a tapestry woven from acceptance, generosity, and, surprisingly, a little bit of space. At the end of the day, I realize that sometimes, boundaries can cradle you just as securely as the ones we tear down. As I sit here on my bed, I find myself glancing at the old photographs taped to my wall, snapshots of family gatherings, Christmas mornings, and birthdays filled with laughter. Each picture tells a story, encapsulating moments that felt so momentous then, yet now seem like echoes of a simpler time. The warm hues of those memories make me smile, but they're also a reminder of how complicated family can be, especially when everyone is trying to navigate their own needs alongside each other's. I think about the last few months and realize that, while the tension with Laura was harsh, it also served as a catalyst for something deeper. It was the anxiety of possibly losing the closeness we built over a lifetime that stirred my heart. Yet somehow, we managed to untangle the thread of that misunderstanding without letting it fray completely. Reflecting on that phone conversation, I remember how we both took turns listening, each word a fragile offering. I can still hear her soft voice, a blend of affection and remorse. "I never meant to make you feel pushed aside," she admitted, her kindness breaking through the facade of hurt we'd both been clinging to. It was in that moment I understood just how much love she had for my space, too, even if she hadn't articulated it clearly before. When I said, "I need my sanctuary, just as you need yours," it felt like the dam holding back our frustrations had finally cracked enough to let a little light seep in. The kids, they bring a certain chaos, a vibrant energy that fills the house even when they're not here. I cherish my time with them, and I can't deny the joy that comes when I see them growing, learning, exploring. But they also symbolize a shift, a change in the dynamic I had been reluctant to embrace until now. Every giggle, every excited shout from them feels like an invitation to stand closer to my sister, but I still hold my boundaries tight like a protective shield. This past weekend, Laura and her kids came over for dinner, and I was surprised at how comfortable everything felt. Maverick, my nephew, who's 7 and possesses all the charm of an overzealous puppy, ran straight for my living room with a worn-out soccer ball. The moment I heard the thud of it against the wall, I felt my stomach drop slightly. Yet, when I walked into the room, seeing him so caught up in his own world, his laughter contagious, something shifted inside me. I didn't need my sanctuary to be unwavering. I could appreciate the beautiful mess life brings while still reserving a corner of my heart and home just for me. By the end of the evening, as I washed the dishes and Laura dried, we couldn't help but swap stories and reminisce. It felt like an old rhythm resurfacing, something we'd both thought we'd lost. The tension started to dissolve in the steam rising from the sink as we joked about our childhood antics, the mischief we'd gotten into, and how our parents had their own challenges. Each laugh pulled us closer, stitching together the tears that had formed in our sisterhood. After everyone went home, I found myself reflecting on the importance of that evening. I felt relief and warmth, not just because we were back on good terms but because I was learning how to flex without breaking. I don't think family means merging into one entity, it's more of a dance of individuality, weaving in and out, maintaining a rhythm that suits everyone involved. Now, weeks later, I've started a little tradition of my own. Every Sunday morning, I make pancakes and invite Laura and the kids, and it's become a lovely ritual that fills my home with the sweet scent of maple syrup and laughter. I hold my boundaries steady, but I also choose to be present, blending my world in theirs without losing myself in the process. As the sun sets this evening, filtering through my bedroom window, casting golden rays across my desk, I feel more serene than ever. Life will continue to offer new challenges, and there may be disagreements and misunderstandings down the road. But I now sit in my sanctuary, firmly rooted while allowing branches of love to extend beyond its walls. And there's a quiet comfort that resides in knowing that both space and connection can simply coexist, harmonizing in a world that often feels at odds. I never thought changing my last name would become such a complicated endeavor, but here I am, sitting in my dimly lit room, grappling with the aftermath of my impulsive decision. Growing up in a small town, my family name was more of a burden than a badge of honor. Our lineage was steeped in a history I never felt proud of. Rumors of our family's past mistakes always hung in the air like an uninvited guest. The moment I turned 18, I began to imagine what life might be like if I severed that last thread connecting me to a family whose values felt increasingly misaligned with my own. Months passed, and the thoughts lingered like a persistent whisper until one day, I finally took the plunge. I went to the courthouse and, with a mix of adrenaline and fear, filed the paperwork to change my last name to something that truly resonated with who I am, something bright, something hopeful. I chose Lark, inspired by the bird that symbolizes joy and the promise of a new beginning. This choice felt exhilarating, liberating even, but revealing this change to my family was daunting. So, I decided to keep it a secret for a little while longer, thinking I could break the news gently when the time felt right. I figured it wouldn't matter much as I'd already distanced myself from the family, only attending gatherings out of obligation. But then the family reunion rolled around, and my heart raced. As we sat around the long table, passing dishes filled with food that had always been a comfort, I felt like a ghost among them. Amid the laughter and familial banter, my cousin casually mentioned how proud he was of the family name, and I felt a sting in my chest. The room fell silent as everyone looked at me, waiting for my response, and in a moment of panic, I quietly excused myself and slipped out into the cool evening air. The conflict brewed in my mind. Was I truly an asshole for wanting to distance myself from a name that felt like a weight? Yet, the guilt gnawed at me like I had committed a crime. After a few days of more silence than I could bear, my mother reached out, concerned, of course, because that's what mothers do. She mentioned how much family meant to her and implied that my secret was like a rift forming between us. I hesitated before replying, my heart thundering as I considered confessing my change. What if they didn't understand? What if they took it personally? Fearing their judgment, I delayed my response and instead found solace in writing in my journal. Here I was, torn between the identity I wanted and the family that seemed to value tradition above all else. Days turned into weeks, and the reunion lingered in my mind, festering more doubts than answers, until one day, I noticed a family group chat buzzing with old photos, laughter, and news updates. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I peeked in, half expecting to feel even more disconnected, but instead found myself smiling at the memories being shared. Then I saw a message pop up from my sister, talking about how much she missed me and how family is everything, even when it feels overwhelming. At that moment, I realized I could have it all, my new identity and my family. I took a deep breath and typed my confession into the group chat, heart racing. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to share something important. I changed my last name. I clicked send before I could overthink it. The response was a mix of shock, confusion, and finally, a lot of love. They asked why, and there was this wave of relief when I explained how I felt. It was a risk, but suddenly their support washed over me like a warm tide. You're still our Lark, my brother texted, and just like that, I wasn't the outsider I had feared I'd be. Families are messy, complicated, and sometimes taken for granted, and maybe I was a bit of an asshole for not being upfront, but in the end, it turned out okay. I realized we could adapt, grow, and reshape our connections. My past didn't need to define me, it could simply be a part of who I was becoming. As I lay down that night, I felt lighter, like I had finally opened a window to let the stale air out. It was a long journey ahead to reconcile my past with my present, but the thought of finally being myself gave me a good kind of hope. As I lay there, that new sense of freedom wrapping around me like a warm blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might have awakened something in my family too. I fell asleep with hopes dancing in my head, hopes that they would understand my decision and that this would spark conversations we'd all been too afraid to have. The next morning, I woke up early, fueled by a mix of anxiety and excitement. I brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling the tiny kitchen, and didn't even bother to change out of my pajamas. With my new last name emblazoned in my mind, I sat down and opened my laptop, gingerly typing a message to my family group chat, my fingers trembling slightly with each keystroke. Hey everyone, I wanted to let you know I've legally changed my last name. I hope you can support me through this. At first, the response was eerily quiet. I could almost hear the collective gasp. I could picture my mom dropping her coffee mug, my dad raising an eyebrow, and my sister, always the upbeat comedian, leaving some sarcastic quip about identity crises. But instead, the silence hung there like fog, thick and suffocating. 5 minutes passed, and my heart raced as I began to think that maybe this was a bigger deal than I had anticipated. Just as I was about to convince myself to delete the message, my phone pinged. It was my sister. Whoa, surprise. I didn't see that coming. But, why? You could have just told us. The floodgates opened after that. My mom chimed in with a cautious, "You know we love you for who you are, right? This feels sudden." And then my dad, with his usual no-nonsense attitude, asked the question I was bracing for: what's wrong with our name? Why not just stick with it? Each message sent another wave of guilt crashing over me. I felt like I was unraveling. All the excitement I had felt just hours before was morphing into the lump of shame sitting in my throat. I explained my reasoning, trying to articulate my desire to break free from family ties that felt more like shackles than support. I reminisced about the hurt and confusion of the past, the inescapable truth that my identity felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. I wrote about how that old name dragged behind me like a ghost. Eventually, the conversation took a different turn. My sister revealed her struggles with our family's expectations, admitting she's always felt like she needed to be the good daughter instead of simply being herself. Even my dad softened, sharing a moment from his own youth when he felt suffocated by his lineage and the pressure to uphold the family name. Those walls began to chip away, and I could almost see fragments of my family emerging from the shadows. Conversations turned more thoughtful, less accusatory. "How can we support you?" came from my mom, and I felt swells of gratitude. We talked for a few hours, unpacking old wounds, stories I assumed were lost. We were no longer a lineage of names and expectations. We became individuals, interconnected but separate, just like the branches of a tree. Each of us unique in our own right while grounded by a shared history. I sat back, amazed at the transformations happening right within our little group chat. It shifted something deeper in my soul. This newfound openness, this blooming understanding of one another, felt like the first rays of sunlight piercing through the long-held clouds above our family. As I scrolled through the messages later that evening, I realized changing my last name was never about erasing my past, it was about reshaping my identity. I fell asleep the next night without the heaviness I had carried for so long. To be clear, the journey ahead wouldn't be without its bumps. Old habits die hard, and months of conversation and growth remain ahead of us. But as I drifted off again, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead, taking my first steps without the burden of my old name pulling me down. It was liberating, like finally taking a deep breath after holding my breath for far too long. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all. Maybe I was just a person learning how to live authentically, and in that, I found peace. The next morning felt different. The sunlight streamed through my window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air, and I could almost hear a quiet celebration in the world outside. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, allowing the shadows from the leaves of the oak tree outside to create an intricate pattern, something abstract and beautiful, kind of like the life I was slowly beginning to carve out for myself. I got up and went about my usual routine, but the lingering tendrils of doubt still tugged at me. I knew that while I was embracing this new chapter, my family wasn't quite on the same page yet. I decided to meet with my sister, Hannah, later that day. We'd shared so many laughs and secrets growing up, and I wanted her to be part of this transformation, but the anxiety bubbled up inside. What would she think? Would my choice come off as selfish? I found myself fidgeting with my phone, the screen lighting up with her name as I hesitated to dial. Eventually, I took a deep breath and sent her a text, asking if she'd like to get lunch. She replied within moments, almost too eagerly, and I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter. The cafe was our little haven, nestled on the corner of our old neighborhood. It had the same vintage charm, the worn leather seats making every conversation feel intimate. We ordered our usual, a club sandwich for me, a wrap for her, and I tried to feign nonchalance, but Hannah saw right through me. "You seem different," she said, biting into her wrap, her eyes narrowing in that way they did when she was genuinely curious. "Yeah, well, I guess you could say I've been doing some soul searching," I replied, trying to put on a brave face. "What do you mean?" she pressed, her expression shifting from playful to concerned. I took another sip of my iced tea, gathering my thoughts. "You know how I changed my last name?" I started, cautiously wading into the topic. Her eyebrows shot up, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about who I am and who I want to be. It's like shedding an old skin that never really fit me." Hannah nodded slowly, and I couldn't tell if she was processing my words or if the wrapping paper from her lunch had taken her by surprise. I get that, she said finally, but why not tell anyone? Like, it feels secretive? I wish I had known sooner. Her words pierced through me. I opened my mouth to explain, to defend my choice, but I realized I didn't have a solid answer. I guess I was scared, I admitted, the words bubbling up like a confession. I didn't want the burden of others' expectations, or their judgment. It was about taking my life back from the shadows of my past. The silence that followed felt heavy, like gravity itself was trying to pull down the weight of our family's history. Hannah looked out the window, watching the way the people passed, lost in their own worlds. You know, I've always been in your corner. I didn't want you to fight this battle alone. Her voice was soft, but it resonated deep within me. I suddenly felt a well of emotions welling up, gratitude, guilt, love. I know, and I appreciate that more than you realize, I replied, reaching out to squeeze her hand. We both sat in that moment, the air around us charged with new possibilities and the realization that the change wouldn't just affect me, it reverberated through all of us. As we finished lunch, the conversation shifted, reflecting a warm future rather than a burdensome past. We would rebuild our family dynamics, step by step, reshaping our identities together. By the time the plates were cleared and we stepped out into the sunlight, it felt like an invisible chain had loosened. I left the cafe feeling lighter once again, perhaps like a phoenix rising from ashes I didn't even know weighed me down before. Sure, I hadn't told everyone up front, and maybe that made me a bit of an asshole. It wasn't perfect, and bumps would surely come as we navigated this new chapter of our family story. But that day, I felt something profound, the acceptance that part of moving forward meant confronting the past, together, not in spite of it. Later that evening, I received a text from my mom, simply saying, "Can we talk?" The slight tremor of anxiety twisted in my stomach again. I wasn't ready for this. But, with a newfound strength coursing through me, I realized it was time. Time to be honest, time to embrace the tangled web of our history. A spark of hope flickered within me again, and I prepared to unravel the secret I had thought would never see the light of day. Maybe by braving this conversation, I could invite others into my liberation, and maybe that would make the journey worth it. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a bar, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and you think, today couldn't possibly get any worse? Well, that was me last Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview for what I thought was my dream position. I'd meticulously prepared for weeks, so naturally, when I bombed the final question, I felt like I'd just thrown my future out the window. As I stared into my glass, feeling sorry for myself, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Facebook message from Rachel, one of my old coworkers. We hadn't spoken since I left that job, and if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't super eager to hear from her. Rachel had a knack for being overly critical. She'd always found a way to step in when she thought I was screwing up, usually in front of the whole team. A real joy at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? So, I hesitated before opening the message. "Hey, I just saw your post about that interview. I hope you did well. Just in case you need any references, let me know." Sweet, right? But a part of me stiffened. I didn't want her help. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity of that workplace, and Rachel was absolutely a part of it. Fueled by whiskey, I typed out a response that I probably shouldn't have. "Thanks, but I'd prefer not to reach out. You and I never quite saw eye to eye at work." I hit send, taken aback by my own boldness. What was I thinking? The warmth in my cheeks reminded me I was still processing rejection from the interview, and maybe I had a little more to drink than I should have. The reply came quicker than I anticipated. "What do you mean? I thought we had a good working relationship." It felt like a slap to the face. Good working relationship? Seriously? Something snapped in me. I was just done. I fired back, "Honestly, I don't like you, Rachel. We didn't have a good relationship, you constantly made me second guess everything, and frankly, I was relieved when I left." There it was, louder than my own thoughts. After a moment of silence, I realized the bar had gone quiet, and I could feel the eyes from a couple of the patrons on me. Oh great, now I was the spectacle. Rachel didn't retaliate, but her typing dots popped up and disappeared. My stomach twisted. Why had I opened this Pandora's box? Finally, her response was blunt. "Wow, I didn't realize I affected you so much." Part of me wanted to take it back, to feign a moment of weakness and resolve it like adults do. But another part wanted to just bask in the clarity of my honesty, even if it terrified me. That night, as I replayed our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and guilt. Maybe I didn't need to have said it in such a public way, but honestly, I had operated under denial for too long, and now the truth was hanging in the air, an exposed nerve I couldn't ignore. In a moment of vulnerable self-reflection, I decided I needed to accept my feelings, however harsh they were. The overwhelming urge to redact was met with a deep-seated understanding. I had finally set a boundary. Fast forward a week, and I learned Rachel had shared our exchange with the whole office, whether out of petty revenge or as some sort of misguided lesson in accountability. The office chatter spiraled, and I became that girl who told off her coworker. It wasn't exactly the outcome I envisioned, but it did bring some clarity. I realized a significant part of my discomfort in the workplace wasn't just Rachel's critiques, but how I allowed her voice to overshadow mine. I had a choice now. I could remain silent about the kind of work environment I wanted, or I could advocate for it fiercely. I chose the latter. Ultimately, it became a turning point. Being honest set me free in ways I didn't expect. Sure, I had momentarily alienated myself from a crowd, perhaps dealing that infamous blow of social discomfort, but sometimes, severing ties is what leads to new beginnings. I sat down at my desk that following Monday, and for the first time, I felt lighter, empowered to not just question but also dictate my worth, and honestly, isn't that what we all strive for after walking away from a toxic environment? In its own way, perhaps I had started stirring the pot, and now my own recipe was coming together. Who knew a drunken confrontation could pave the way for something entirely unexpected? I took a deep breath and settled into that newfound empowerment, my fingers dancing over the keyboard as I tackled emails with a clarity I'd lacked before. The awkwardness from Friday's confrontation still buzzed softly in the back of my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. If anything, it emboldened me to navigate my workday with a sharper sense of who I was and what I wanted. The air felt different, as if I'd shaken off dust that had settled too thickly over the months spent tiptoeing around the opinions of others. Still, it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I glanced up occasionally, my former coworker, Liam, hovering around the break room, bantering with others. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Some friends avoided his gaze while others awkwardly laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And then there was me, torn between relief and guilt. Yes, I'd said what I had to, but watching him try to fit back into the dynamic with forced smiles tugged at something within me. Was I the one who had thrown the first stone, or had I merely uncovered something that was always rotting beneath the surface? After the day stretched on, I found myself in a meeting where he made a comment that was, quite frankly, absurd. The room contained an array of reactions, nervous giggles, suppressed eye rolls, but I felt it sharper. The urge to call him out again gnawed at my insides, but this time, I held my tongue. The last confrontation had rocked the boat enough. My job wasn't worth the backlash of becoming the office pariah. I decided instead to be the observer, taking mental notes of how people interacted with one another, how toxic conversations shifted like the tides, and recognizing that I was free to swim away from that shoreline. Later, as I was packing up for the day, a nagging thought played in my head: was my confrontation worth the unraveling it caused? It felt good to speak my truth, but I didn't want to spiral into another black hole of conflict. I let it roll around for the rest of the evening, along with the slower moving hum of my thoughts. I got home and poured myself a glass of wine, sank into my couch, and turned on a show that I knew would soothe my restless brain. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found that subreddit I frequented. As I typed out my experiences, framing it just right to elicit some feedback, I felt a tide of hope. Maybe I wasn't an asshole for wanting respect, but even writing those words out made me realize the complexity of it all. We are social creatures, but we often forget that the cost of fitting in can sometimes be the highest price of all. The next day, I entered the office, buoyed by the feedback I'd already received from various users on Reddit. Many encouraged me to keep being true to myself, while others raised valid points that got me thinking. Maybe with subtlety rather than outright honesty, there could be a middle ground. Just then, I spotted Liam at the far corner of the break room, isolated but not entirely alone. He was talking to Sarah, an old friend of mine from another department. My heart sank slightly. Was this the moment we should talk about what happened? I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to address it like adults? I noticed Sarah laugh at something he said, and with it came a twinge of jealousy I didn't know I had. Suddenly, I craved closure, but I wouldn't allow myself to be the one to initiate it. My ego clashed with my desire for peace, but as I moved to pour a cup of coffee, I caught Liam's eye. He smirked, and something shifted inside me, something dark lifted, and instead of feeling anger, I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Maybe he was just navigating his way through this strange office dynamic as I was. I took a sip of my coffee, suddenly deciding that I wouldn't avoid him anymore. Maybe once bitten, twice shy, but I was done living like the awkward chess piece caught between an unyielding game. For better or worse, the echoes of that night still lingered, but instead of defining what I did wrong, they ignited a new curiosity. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt lighter, braced by the possibilities that lay ahead. After all, if I could be strong enough to voice my dislike, then maybe I could also find the courage to create new connections. I smiled softly at the thought, understanding now that growth often springs from the messy and uncomfortable feelings we try to push aside. It was about time for all of us to step up or move aside. As the days passed, I started noticing little shifts around me that reflected my newfound resolve. I interacted with coworkers I had previously ignored, the ones whose small talk seemed trivial in the shadow of my ex-coworkers' drama. Each interaction was a gentle electric charge, awakening a part of me that had long felt dormant. One afternoon, during a lunch break that felt too quiet, I joined a few colleagues who usually sat at a different table. They were discussing a recent movie, laughter punctuating their conversation. Without thinking much, I chimed in with my own take on it, surprised at how easily my words flowed. They welcomed my input as if I had always belonged there, and with each laugh shared, my confidence grew. I began to realize that I could carve out my space without pretending to be someone I wasn't. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had to navigate the aftermath of that confrontation with my ex-coworker, Julian. Word had spread through the office grapevine. I could almost feel the unspoken questions pulsing in the air whenever I passed by my old teammates. "Did you really say that? You called him out?" I felt their curiosity like heat against my skin, and sometimes it was unsettling. One morning, I found a message from Julian, through an app we once used to communicate during work. His words were careful and almost businesslike. "Can we talk? I'd like to clear the air." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. On one hand, I wanted to dismiss him completely, unwilling to reopen that wound. Still, a part of me felt compelled to understand what he might say. Maybe he was genuinely sorry, or maybe he'd warped the narrative to cast himself as the victim. Deciding to meet felt like a reckless gamble. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted him at a corner table, his posture almost defensive, hands clasped tightly over his coffee cup. I chose not to sit opposite him and instead settled into the chair next to him, creating a barrier, perhaps as a quiet reminder that this space we had once shared had fundamentally changed. Julian opened with a hesitant compliment about my courage during that night. "I wasn't expecting you to say anything, honestly," he said, and I sensed a mixture of surprise and irritation in his tone. "People usually just let me walk over them." I couldn't help but scoff, the sound escaping before I could rein it in. "You know, you've made a habit of stomping on others to get ahead. Maybe that's why no one stood up to you before." The challenge hung in the air, and our eyes locked, a shared moment of confrontation that felt strangely invigorating. His expression shifted, caught between irritation and a hint of self-awareness. "I didn't realize I was coming off like that," he said slowly, as if genuinely processing my words. We continued to talk, the tension ebbing and flowing, dissecting the past while carefully avoiding reliving it. I could still sense the defensive walls he held up, but there were flickers of vulnerability, almost like he was testing the waters to see if I would lash out again. We spoke for nearly an hour, and I found myself, surprisingly, feeling some degree of empathy for him. Here was a person who, despite his shortcomings, was human and complex. We parted ways that day without any grand gestures of reconciliation, just a simple nod of recognition that we had laid a few cards on the table. As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much my decisions had shifted the dynamics of my workplace, taking the first step toward forging a community that felt less about keeping up appearances and more about honest connections. It opened doors to deeper conversations infused with real understanding. I found myself surrounded by allies rather than competitors, and we collaborated on projects with a synergy I had never experienced before. Reflecting on that night now, I can't help but marvel at how a single act of clarity and confrontation, however messy it was, laid the groundwork for a healthier environment. Sometimes we must be uncomfortable to unearth the beauty in our connections. Julian sent an unexpected message weeks later, just a single thumbs-up emoji after I presented a project idea we both worked on. I chuckled at how far we'd come, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There's strength in authenticity, I realized, and I was finally ready to embrace it. I always thought family meant sticking together no matter what, But here I was, standing on the brink of not attending my sister's wedding, and it felt like a betrayal. My sister, Alyssa, had been planning her big day for over a year, and I could see how excited she was about every little detail. But as the date drew nearer, I learned the venue wasn't accessible. For someone who's been in a wheelchair since a car accident a decade ago, it was more than just a minor inconvenience. It felt like a punch to the gut. I vividly remember sitting in my living room, laptop on my lap, scrolling through pictures of the beautiful estate Alyssa had chosen with its sweeping staircases and narrow doorways. I couldn't help but wonder if she had ever envisioned a day when her older brother would be trapped outside, missing the one moment I knew she'd dreamed about since she could barely walk. I tried to shake off the knot tightening in my stomach, convincing myself I could find a way around it. Maybe I could watch the ceremony on video or have someone FaceTime me from the venue. But what kind of brother would I be if I chose to observe from a distance? That thought gnawed at me, pulling at the very fabric of my identity. I wrestled with an internal conflict, feeling a whirlwind of emotions: anger towards my sister for not ensuring the venue was accessible, guilt for even considering not going, and bitterness towards my circumstances, as if they were dragging me into a corner away from being part of the family. I finally picked up my phone, my heart racing as I dialed her number. When she answered, there was a brightness in her voice that made my heart ache. "I can't wait for you to see everything, it's going to be perfect," she exclaimed, and I could almost picture her twirling around in excitement. "About that," I stumbled, my voice thick, and I felt a wave of nausea crash over me as I explained the accessibility issues. There was a loaded silence on the other end before Alyssa's tone shifted. "I didn't think to check. I'm so sorry, I thought it would work," she said, and I could tell she was genuinely upset. I didn't want her day ruined or for her to feel guilty when she shouldn't. "You should still go," I found myself insisting, my throat tight. I just don't know if I can be there and not actually be there, you know?" I hung up feeling like I just dropped an emotional bomb. The days ticked by, and the wedding loomed like a shadow over me. I could picture her in her stunning gown, surrounded by smiling friends and family, while I would be left questioning my place in it all. A week before the wedding, Alyssa called again, her voice more subdued. "Is there any way you can come? I've been looking into portable ramps and maybe we can figure this out." As sweet as her intentions were, the thought of making her scramble at the last minute felt like yet another weight on her shoulders. "You know what? I think it's okay if you and I just FaceTime," I suggested weakly, my heart breaking at disconnecting us in such a pivotal moment. "I love you, Alyssa, but I don't want to be a distraction." The day of the wedding, I dressed up and sat in front of my laptop, fighting back tears as the first chords of the wedding march filled my living room. I could almost feel the warmth of the sun streaming through the trees at the venue and hear the cheers of family members rejoicing. Alyssa looked beautiful, glowing in her gown, but as I raised my hand to wave hello, my heart felt heavier than it ever had. After the ceremony, as I watched my sister laugh and dance, a small part of me felt anger bubbling to the surface, anger at the world for shutting me out, and a bigger part, a sort of bittersweet acceptance, knowing that this was my reality. I realized that distancing myself from the family wasn't the answer, no matter how much it stung. Sure, Alyssa hadn't thought through the accessibility, but she loved me, and that love didn't hinge on the staircases I couldn't climb. As I shut my laptop after the final toast, I felt a mixture of regret and relief. I hadn't been there in person, but in some way, our bond remained intact. Months later, she and I would go to lunch, and in between bites of sweet potato fries, she slipped a note across the table, an invitation to help choose the venue for her renewal of vows in a few years. "I promise it'll be accessible, this time," she winked. And just like that, through all the twists and turns, I found a glimmer of hope that we could advance together, step by step, no matter the distance life put between us. As I sat across from her, the smell of garlic aioli mingling with the warm spring air, I realized how much I had missed moments like this, just the two of us laughing and reminiscing. The sweet potato fries felt like a bridge over the gap that had grown during our years of silence. My sister had always been the one with boundless energy, pulling me along on adventures I never asked for but ended up loving. I remembered all the times I had wheeled alongside her through bustling city streets and quiet parks, her laughter echoing in my ears while my wheelchair was simply a part of the scenery. But then came the wedding, a day that should have been filled with joy, turned into a painful reminder of our differences and the rift that widened with each turn of the planning while she embarked upon without considering my needs. It hadn't been just a physical divide, it had felt like an emotional chasm, one that I feared might never be bridged. When she slipped that note across the table, my heart did a little skip, but I also felt the weight of uncertainty. Could we truly move forward? I stared at the invitation, the elegant script of her handwriting unspooling memories of our childhood, twilight backyard adventures, late-night conversations, and the little secrets we whispered as we tucked ourselves into bed, feeling invincible. I chuckled softly at the graphics she'd sketched. In the margins, twisting shapes of flowers and stars that looked more like a childhood doodle than a wedding concept. So where do we start? I finally asked, my voice betraying the mix of excitement and caution churning inside me. She squeezed her brown eyes in that way she did when she was gleeful, a sign that we were on the same page again. How about the beach? I've always wanted to say I do with the waves crashing behind me. As the conversation flowed, the ideas poured out like a refreshing tide, bringing warmth and a sense of renewal I hadn't realized I was longing for. We drew sketches on napkins, imagined colors that would drip down the canvas of our memories. The sun illuminated our laughter, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could feel the spark of our bond rekindling. Yet, the doubt lingered in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder that we still had hurdles to overcome. Months passed as we wove through planning meetings, and as my sister pursued her dream, I cheered her on, yet my heart was a mixture of elation and lingering anxiety. How would she react when the spotlight shifted to the accessibility concerns again? Would we be able to mesh our visions, the grandeur of her dream wedding with the stark reality of my needs? I can't help but think of how the last few years had unfolded. The push and pull of our lives seemed like an intricate dance, one where we stepped in and out of sync. Then, the day finally arrived for the venue tour, and the stakes felt immeasurable. With each step closer to the location, my heart raced, anticipation wrapping around me like a comforter. This was a chance for us, not just for her, but for us as sisters. We pulled up to the beach venue, the soft sound of waves greeting us. She hopped out excitedly, taking in the scenery, and my heart tightened with a mixture of hope and dread. What do you think? She called back, her voice cutting through the salty breeze. I looked at the row of steps leading to the beautiful sandy stretch, and a lump formed in my throat. It has to be accessible, I replied, my voice shaky as I formulated the words. There was a pause, then she turned back, her expression transforming from joy to concern. The realization hung between us, a flimsy thread ready to snap. I didn't even think about that, she admitted softly. I felt a wave of frustration crash over me, but there was something in the way she looked at me, regret mixed with determination. Let's make sure that it is, I said, grounding her back into the conversation. What matters is that we celebrate your love, and no one should have to limit themselves based on perceived barriers. As we spent the afternoon discussing every detail from ramps to seating arrangements, I could feel that earlier tension melting away. She listened, genuinely wanting my input, and by the end of it, there was a sense of unity, a reaffirmation that we were partners in this journey. And as I wheeled down the ramp they reluctantly agreed to install, gentle sunlight spilling over us, I couldn't help but feel that we were building something reliable. A relationship that allowed for both of our anxieties and ambitions, stretching into the future like the horizon before us. We were stumbling into a new chapter, and in that moment, every step she took toward inclusivity felt as powerful as the waves crashing behind us, paving the way for us to finally come together. As we rolled away from the fluttering banners and the sound of laughter behind us, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the end of one intense chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. The sun cast a golden glow on the pavement, and every part of me ached to believe that we had finally moved past the doubts and strange tensions that had once defined our relationship. Our lunch promise, nestled between bites of sweet potato fries, felt like a pact, a blend of growth and understanding that I hadn't been sure we'd ever reach. We spent those early days after the wedding navigating each other's perspectives, developing a rhythm that suited both of us. Sarah, ever the planner, wanted to ensure that what had once felt limiting now blossomed into opportunities. I'd go through design magazines stacked on her coffee table, filling the spaces with doodles of accessible moments, visualizations of love and laughter shared across barrier-free tables. Choosing hues and fabrics that spoke to our personalities became a habit we cherished. I'd watch her eyes light up whenever she pitched new ideas, and each time my heart swelled more than the last. One evening, while we sat on her porch adorned with string lights, I shared my fears about everything that had transpired, the doubts that still occasionally crept into my knotted stomach. What if this is just a moment? I asked, nervousness inching into my voice. What if we fall back into old patterns? She laid her hand across mine, and warmth surged through me as she searched my eyes. It's just the beginning. We're wiser now, right? We won't ignore our differences, we'll embrace them. It struck me how easily she spun my concerns into threads of commitment, weaving our different experiences into something sturdy. Months rolled on, and those gatherings became pivotal. Each event we attended, every meeting with friends, felt like practice. I learned where the gaps in conversations widened and where certain remarks stuck, and Sarah mirrored my growth with palpable enthusiasm. It was strangely exhilarating, a slow dance of vulnerability and strength. We'd share a laugh or a sidelong glance while standing in a circle of friends, our unspoken connection creating everything from an inside joke to the safety of conversation. After a year of navigating through life together, Sarah proposed we host a weekend retreat for family and friends, another venue on the horizon. This time, she meticulously scouted accessible cabins in the hills, poring over pictures and reviews. I argued that they felt too rustic, but she shrugged it off with that charm I'd come to adore. It's about creating memories, not fitting a mold. We can have fun anywhere. As the retreat weekend approached, I felt those familiar jitters rise. What if things unraveled? What if the old resentments resurfaced? But as friends streamed into the cozy cabin and laughter overshadowed my worries, I felt the sweetness of our hard work settle around us like a hug. Sarah didn't flinch when someone knocked their drink, spilling it across the floor. She smiled, pulled me closer, and called for towels. We adapt. In those little moments, I recognized just how much we had evolved, no longer sidestepping anything difficult. We faced it head on, laughing about mishaps, sharing stories late into the night. As everyone gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories, I leaned back, soothed by the crackling flames. The weathered cabin surrounded us felt strong, just like our bond. There was something beautifully imperfect about building our new reality together, one where glances spoke volumes and where every shared experience was a step forward, however small. I could feel the roots of our relationship deepening, intertwining, much like the intertwining branches of the trees around us, and with it came a promise that neither of us would ever stop trying to understand. When Sarah caught my eye and raised her marshmallow-coated stick, I realized that this was more than a moment, it was a commitment, a radiant journey forged through respect and love. It wasn't just about getting things right, it was about creating the space to be wrong, to grow, and together, soar against any odds. I squeezed her hand, my heart whispering words of gratitude, knowing that our story was still unfolding beautifully, in ways neither of us could predict. I never thought a water fountain could become a point of contention, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring out at the little slice of paradise my backyard has become. When I bought my house 4 years ago, it came with an abundance of quirks, most of them charming, but there was this one thing that caught my eye immediately, a dilapidated stone fountain, tucked away beneath a tangle of vines and weeds. At first, it seemed like yet another problem to tackle among the many renovations I had lined up. But as I stripped away the layers of neglect, I found something beautiful beneath, the intricate carvings that wove into the stonework, the delightful gurgle of water once I got it running again. It became the heart of my outdoor space, a sanctuary where I could escape after long days of work. Friends and family loved it, and I cherished the evenings spent sipping wine on my patio, the sound of water filling the air. It was my little oasis, and I wasn't about to let go of it easily. But then my neighbor, Lisa, moved in next door, and that's when everything unraveled. She was nice enough at first, friendly, always waving, but there was something about her demeanor that felt off when she mentioned the fountain. One afternoon, she brought over a plate of cookies and casually asked if I'd ever considered giving the fountain to her. It would really complete my garden, she said, her eyes sparkling with what I could only assume was enthusiasm. I was taken aback, a little incredulous, as I chuckled and politely declined, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't, and from that day forward, her comments turned into subtle hints, and those hints became outright requests. Think about how much better it would look in my yard, she'd say, and I felt a knot in my stomach every time. I was torn, it was just a fountain, after all, but it was my fountain, a part of my home and heart. Each request felt increasingly invasive, as though she was infringing on something very personal to me. I contemplated various ways to approach her, to explain that it wasn't just about the fountain itself, but about the memories it represented, the peace it brought me after some tumultuous times in my life. Then one evening, she blatantly asked me, "Are you really going to hold on to that fountain forever? It's just sitting there gathering dust." Her words felt like a slap. I could feel my anger bubbling up, fueled by her brazen disregard for my feelings. I tried to explain how much it meant to me, how it represented a fresh start after a tough chapter, but she interrupted, insisting, "You can get another one. It's not like you can keep it forever." We exchanged words, and for the first time, I let her see the fierce protectiveness I had for the fountain, my voice trembling as I said, "I don't want to part with it." She rolled her eyes, and I knew then that we were no longer just neighbors, we were adversaries. Days passed where I felt a heavy weight on my chest whenever I spotted her in her yard. I began to feel self-conscious, paranoid even. Would she think about it every time she looked at her garden? Would my unwillingness to part with a piece of stone ruin the neighborhood peace? I couldn't shake the guilt, but I also couldn't give in. That fountain had become a symbol for me, and letting go would feel like surrendering a piece of myself. I eventually confided in a few friends, and to my surprise, they rallied behind me, urging me to stand my ground. Eventually, after much back and forth, I sat down with her one afternoon, my heart pounding, and reiterated my refusal. "You can't just take what isn't yours," I said, and to my shock, she seemed to soften. She admitted that she was frustrated she didn't have a fountain of her own, and in that moment, I actually felt a twinge of empathy. It wasn't just about the fountain for her, it was probably about wanting something beautiful to make her feel at home too. We ended that conversation on a truce of sorts, more respectful but still a little strained. All these months later, I still feel the weight of that moment, of the decision I made, but I also see the value in what I chose. Preserving my sanctuary was about safeguarding my peace. I found solace in the knowledge that home is not just about the physical space, but the emotions tied to it. It's now been a year since that awkward confrontation, and Lisa and I have made an effort to bridge the gap. We wave at each other, and I even invited her over for coffee a few times. I can't say we'll ever be best friends, but at least we're civil. The fountain still bubbles in my yard, a testament to my journey, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and a gentle whisper that sometimes, it's okay to take up space and claim what is yours. As I sit on the patio, the sun spilling warm rays over our little backyard oasis, I watch the water fountain sparkle in the late afternoon light. It bubbles softly, sending little ripples across the surface of the birdbath beneath it, where cheerful robins dip in for brief splashes. I still remember the day Lisa had come over out of the blue, her voice shaky as she demanded I give it back, her eyes wide with disbelief at my firm refusal. It's funny how just a year can change so much. Back then, I felt a cocktail of surprise and frustration at her abruptness, but now, there's a sense of calm, almost acceptance, in our relationship. Sure, we weren't chatting about the favorite shade of lipstick or surviving the latest Netflix series over coffee, but a nod and a wave held their own kind of conversation, didn't they? It felt good to reclaim that space, not just in my yard, but in my life. I've learned to appreciate that sometimes, boundaries are not just about lines drawn in the sand, they're about personal growth and understanding what you deserve. You know, the fountain, once an unwanted artifact in our home, morphed into a symbol of resilience. I even caught myself thinking about how Lisa had painted her life in a stark black and white, while mine gradually became a watercolor, soft and blending, colorful and hopeful. One afternoon, after inviting her over for coffee again, I decided to take a chance. As Lisa sipped her latte and glanced curiously at the bubbling fountain, I mentioned how I'd been considering adding some pebbles around the base, maybe even a few plants to create a more inviting atmosphere. She hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly, and I could almost see her weighing her words, like she was taking measured steps into a land that felt unfamiliar. "You know," she said cautiously, "I always thought that fountain had a wrong place in our neighborhood, but now I see it fits." Her voice trailed off, and a hint of a smile danced on her lips. At that moment, it struck me how layered our emotions had been, how much history nestled beneath the surface of our seemingly mundane interactions. It felt like a truce, a mutual recognition that our choices shaped our spaces, but they didn't have to define us entirely. After that coffee, I found myself reflecting on our lives more deeply. Maybe we were more alike than different, two women figuring out our place in this world, both grappling with our own battles but learning to navigate the complexities of adult relationships. Every time I looked at the fountain, it reminded me of the bubbling emotions we often kept bottled inside, just waiting for a spark to bring them back to life. Season by season, as the fountain continued to flow and thrive, I planted flowers around it, and they blossomed, matching the vibrant changes occurring in my life. They seemed to invite bees and butterflies to our little corner of the world, echoing the beauty of growth and coexistence. Then one afternoon, while arranging a cluster of marigolds around the edge, I noticed Lisa standing by the fence, watching me. Unlike before, her expression was softer, more open. "I was just admiring your flowers," she called out, and for a moment, I paused, feeling a thread of connection weave silently through the air. "Thanks. Want to help?" I blurted out, a mix of unexpected eagerness and genuine hope pouring out. To my surprise, she hopped over without hesitation and spent a couple of hours digging in the dirt, laughter spilling from us in easy waves as we swapped stories about everything from home projects to quirky family traditions. I don't know if that afternoon changed everything, but it certainly shifted the momentum between us. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that preserving space, and fighting for it, can lead to unexpected connections. The fountain, once a source of tension, turned into a centerpiece of friendship, an unlikely bond flowing gracefully through the currents of our lives. And as those blooms opened under the sun, I realized that sometimes, it's not just about claiming what's rightfully yours, but also about sharing the beauty in your life with others, creating something larger than both of you. So here I sit, cup of tea in hand, watching a new chapter unfold, one that flows as effortlessly as the water in that soft, bubbling fountain. The sun hung low in the sky, pooling golden light in my backyard, illuminating the gentle dance of leaves stirred by a light breeze. As I sat with my cup of tea, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The fountain, with its rhythmic bubbling, seemed almost alive, gurgling its secrets while I reflected on this past year. Lisa's visits had become frequent, and in a way, they felt like nurturing the roots of a friendship that I hadn't seen coming. Funny how a piece of stone and water could forge a connection between two people who had once viewed each other as enemies. I often marveled at how we would sit on my patio, talking over the sound of that bubbling fountain while the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Initially, our conversations danced around pleasantries, but gradually they deepened, sharing stories about our childhoods, our aspirations, and even our fears. I learned that Lisa had spent years feeling like an outsider, displaced from her cherished home that had been sold to its current landlord, and how she often wished she could reclaim even just a small piece of it. That, perhaps, was her own fight for space, one she had focused on before my waterfall had come into the picture. Some days, in the soft glow of twilight, I could sense her longing as she gazed at the fountain, as if it were a bridge to a past she missed. "It really is such a beautiful feature," she would say, her voice low and contemplative. "I remember how it used to be in my parents' yard. Just a small, humble pot with a bit of trickling water, but it sparked so many happy gatherings." Each of her memories wove a thread between us, connecting our experiences in unexpected ways. We grew closer, too, when we would host neighborhood gatherings, allowing others to see our evolving friendship. The fountain stood as a testament to our ability to create something positive from old grudges. I remember the day when the first blush of spring arrived, and we teamed up to organize a small block party. As laughter filled the air and children played by the fountain, I caught a glimpse of Lisa's smile, unrestrained and genuine. It was as though she had set down the burdens of comparison and jealousy. And honestly, I felt lighter too. The bitterness I had once clung to had slipped away, replaced by a sense of shared joy. But like a breeze that turned suddenly, our connection met a momentary pause. One day, Lisa arrived with a different energy about her. There was a weight in her smile, a melancholic shadow behind her eyes. "I may have to move," she said, sitting down at the edge of my patio. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. After months of building something I thought was strong and lasting, my heart sank. "My job is relocating me. I'm going to have to leave the neighborhood in a few weeks." For a moment, everything felt surreal. I resisted the urge to fold in on myself, to protect my heart from the thought of losing this friendship we had carefully nurtured. "Is there any way to stay?" I blurted out, wishing I could teleport her into staying just a little longer. But she shook her head with a gentle sadness, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I wish. I'll miss our tea times, and I'll miss the fountain in your yard, too." Those words struck me. It was more than just a fountain, it represented our journey together, the growth we nurtured in one another through shared laughter and vulnerability. I realized then that preserving space isn't just a matter of claiming something physical, it's also about creating emotional ties and legacy in our lives. I took a breath and cleared my throat. If you have to move, you have to move. But how about instead of saying goodbye, we make this an adventure? Let's start planning some visits, and I'll send you updates about the fountain, what blossoms, what birds arrive, and who visits. It can be our place still. A smile broke through her somber demeanor, and just like that, our moment of uncertainty transformed. "You promise?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with hope. "I want to hear all the stories." We both laughed, and I could feel the air lightening around us. It was a conversation that echoed what I had learned: while standing your ground is important, allowing yourself the flexibility to share experiences and memories with others can lead to bonds that withstand distance. As the last embers of daylight faded, we sat together in comfortable silence. Each bubble of the fountain seemed to whisper promises of continuity. I stared out at the sparkling water, realizing that this moment, though bittersweet, would not mark the end but rather a new chapter, one that could flow just as effortlessly as the water coursing through our fountain. And as I watched her leave that evening, the warm glow of a blossoming friendship buzzed around me like the remnants of sunlight. Even if space would separate us, the connection we forged would carry on, a reassuring flow that time would not dim. You're never quite prepared for the moment when a friendship you thought was solid begins to crack, like the sudden appearance of a hairline fracture in a beloved piece of pottery. I always thought my best friend, Jessica, and I were inseparable. We met in college, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared cravings for pizza, and over the years, our friendship deepened through heartbreaks and triumphant job hunts. So, when she announced her engagement, I was ecstatic. The proposal story was adorable and included a classic movie moment. He got down on one knee at their favorite park, a sunset painting the sky behind them. But there was a twist, one I didn't see coming. She made a whole bridal party, picking 3 other friends as bridesmaids while leaving me out. My heart sank not just because I was omitted, but because there was no explanation, no discussion. It felt like a silent verdict on our friendship, sudden and devastating. In those first few weeks after her announcement, I threw myself into my job, burying myself in reports and deadlines, but still, her wedding was all anyone could talk about. Soon, it felt like the walls were closing in, everyone's excitement amplifying my hurt. When the invitations were sent out, and I received mine, just as a regular guest, it all hit me again. "Are you going to help me?" she asked one evening, her voice hopeful and bright. She needed help with planning, with organizing details, and with the emotional upheaval that comes with wedding preparations. A million thoughts surged through me, but all I managed was a restrained nod, feigning enthusiasm. Inside, though, a storm raged. I was angry at Jessica for not including me, but even more at myself for being so sensitive. She was still my best friend, right? I wrestled with the decision, tossing and turning at night, replaying our memories, trying to convince myself the exclusion didn't matter. But when I finally made the call, I felt as if I was stepping onto a tightrope. "Jess, I need to be honest," I told her, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't think I can help you with this." The silence that followed felt monumental, like I had just detonated a small bomb in the middle of our relationship. "Why?" she asked, confusion and hurt lacing her voice. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to articulate the ache I'd felt since becoming just a guest. "You didn't make me a bridesmaid. I honestly feel sidelined, like I'm not as important to you as I thought." There was a moment of silence that stretched on eternally. I briefly wondered if I should take it back, maybe promise to help anyway, but I needed her to understand why this hurt. There was probably a good reason, maybe she thought me too busy or too far away. But instead, it felt like rejection, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Jessica's reply was a mixture of shock and disappointment, and in that moment, I saw the big gap forming between us, a chasm of unspoken words. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered, and I felt the pain in her voice matching my own. "I just didn't think you'd want to." Those were the words that stung. They insinuated that maybe our friendship had been one-sided, or that I had become just a footnote in her new life narrative. Our conversation spiraled into arguments, silence, then tears. We avoided each other for days, walls closing in even more until they felt like a suffocating box. I had to confront my own insecurities. Was I being petty? A part of me wanted to reach out again, to apologize, but I wasn't sure I could stand being in a situation that made me feel so small. Eventually, while I wrestled with my thoughts, I received a text from Jessica. "I'm sorry for everything. Can we talk?" It was an olive branch, but I hesitated, caught between pride and the desperate wish to salvage our friendship. As I prepared for the conversation, I realized this wasn't just about a wedding or the title of bridesmaid. It was about clarity, about understanding our bond and figuring out where we stood now. In my heart, I wanted to believe that even if our friendship looked different, it wouldn't have to vanish. Time would tell where that conversation would lead us, but for now, I felt strangely hopeful that perhaps our friendship could bend without breaking. Life isn't always about titles and roles, sometimes, it's about navigating the gray areas together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over everything as I watched the shadows stretch across the yard. Wedding preparation was in full swing at Emily's house, her younger sister and some of their closest friends buzzing around like bees. I took a moment to breathe, the sweet scent of blooming flowers blending with the anxiety swirling in my stomach. I'd spent nights imagining what this talk would entail, rehearsing potential angles and arguments in my head, but none of that seemed to matter the moment I stepped into the realm of reality. My best friend, the one I'd laughed with through countless late-night chats, the one I turned to during heartbreaks and victories alike, was standing before me, ideally the happiest bride-to-be. Yet there was a strange awkwardness between us. It felt like a vast canyon separating two cliffs, the old emotions reeling and clashing with the unresolved tension of our situation. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I ventured, my voice caught somewhere between a plea and a whisper of uncertainty. Emily turned, her expression shifting from exuberant joy to cautious curiosity. There was a flicker of concern in her brown eyes, but, thankfully, no defensiveness. I watched as she nodded, leading me into a quieter corner of the yard where the sounds of chatter faded to muffled echoes. "Is everything okay?" she asked, a hint of worry creeping into her tone. I hesitated for a moment, searching for the right way to phrase my thoughts. "I just wanted to tell you that I've been feeling really left out since you announced the wedding. I know I wasn't chosen as a bridesmaid, and it stings, honestly." The words spilled from me, raw and unedited. Emily's face fell slightly, as if the wind had been knocked from her sails. "I didn't mean to exclude you. It's not that. I had to make some tough choices, and there was so much pressure from family," she replied, tears pooling slightly in her eyes. I hated seeing her upset, yet the frustration bubbled within me. How was it that the planning of her day, a day supposed to bring joy, was also tearing at the fabric of our friendship? We'd always celebrated each other's successes, supporting one another through thick and thin. "Emily, it feels like our friendship doesn't hold the same weight anymore. It's like I started retreating into my feelings, knowing I was on the outskirts of such an important moment for you," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. I tried to explain that it wasn't just the bridesmaid title, it was about being an integral part of her life. It was about feeling seen, feeling valued. "I want to be there for you, but I also need to know where I fit in, you know?" Emily's expression turned contemplative, a mixture of regret and understanding washing over her. "I really didn't think it would feel like that to you. You mean so much to me, and I understand why you'd be hurt," she said, her voice softening. "I'm sorry. I want you there, despite the traditional roles and things." We stood in silence for a moment, both reflecting upon the rift and the bridge that was slowly being built. My heart warmed with the possibility that there was more to our relationship than just the traditional norms society imposed on these moments. As we spoke more, apologies were exchanged, emotions fluctuated, tears, laughter, and finally a mutual understanding emerged. We decided I'd help with the wedding, not as a bridesmaid but as a devoted friend with a unique role, pivotal to the day yet without any labels that might diminish how I felt. It was then, in that honest exchange, that I realized friendships may shift and change, but that doesn't mean they have to wither away. There was a newfound desire to reshape our dynamic, and it flickered back to life. Months later, on the day of the wedding itself, as I stood near the entrance watching Emily float down the aisle in her magnificent gown, the butterflies inside my stomach danced not from jealousy, but from pride and a sense of elation. I smiled, not because I was there as a part of the bridal party but because I was celebrating my best friend, the one who had chosen to navigate the complexities of life with me instead of leaving me behind. Sure, the wedding didn't bring the same picturesque fantasy I might have fantasized about, but it illustrated how the love we shared had a way of bending, growing, and adapting through life's unexpected turns. I walked over to her after the ceremony, wrapping my arms around her as she glowed in happiness. Despite our hiccup, we were moving forward. Our bond forged stronger against the backdrop of a wedding, not diminished by any single title. As I pulled away from our embrace, I noticed her eyes glistening, not just from the emotional whirlpool of the day but also with gratitude. "You were amazing today," she said, and I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a true acknowledgement, the first step toward healing whatever cracks had formed between us. That moment, wrapped in the warmth of her joy, grounded me, reminding me of all the laughter we'd shared over late-night movies and heartbreaks. We were built on memories, not titles, memories that had survived everything from petty arguments about whose turn it was to pick the restaurant to late-night heart-to-hearts about our wildest dreams. Maybe the role of bridesmaid had taken a backseat, but our friendship deserved recognition of its own, resilient and brimming with history. We stepped into the reception area, the whispers of congratulations. "And you look gorgeous," swirling around us like champagne bubbles. The music pulsed, a contagious beat that made it impossible not to sway a little, despite the awkwardness still nipping at the edges of my mind. I watched as she spun in her dress, her laughter cutting through the noise, and suddenly, I knew I wanted to dive in, to let go of the tension. I grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the dance floor, and we flailed around like two awkward marionettes, laughing as I spun her around, letting the day wash over me. As the night wore on, I took a moment to step outside onto the patio. The stars were twinkling like tiny beacons, and the sounds from inside softened. I pulled my phone out, contemplating the messages flying back and forth with my other friends, all debating whether or not I was right to feel hurt about not being a bridesmaid. Was I supposed to forgive and forget just because I realized that deep down, I craved her happiness more than the recognition? I didn't want to become a subject of petty gossip, but I also didn't want to silence my feelings. I pondered whether I was being irrational. Was I the asshole? I swirled the drink in my hand, suddenly exhausted by the complexity of it all. Then I heard the door creak open behind me. It was her, stepping out into the night, her voice soft and sincere. "Can I join you?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability coloring her tone. I nodded, and we stood side by side, both staring into the dark sky. "Sorry for earlier. I know I messed up not making you a bridesmaid," she started, her words tumbling out like a waterfall of emotions. I felt a knot tighten in my throat. "I thought it would be easier, but I see now how it might have hurt you." I turned to face her, wanting to speak but lost in the depth of her gaze. "It's okay. I value our friendship so much," I finally managed. "It means everything to me. I guess I just felt a little abandoned." There was a pause, a shared silence thick with understanding. "I didn't choose you to be my bridesmaid, but I did choose you to be in my life," she said slowly, her voice carrying weight. "You're still my best friend, and I'm sorry that title hurt you. You deserve to feel celebrated too." She took my hand in hers, warm and reassuring, and for that brief moment, the cosmic tension began to dissolve. This wasn't just about the wedding, it was about articulation, about redefining what mattered most to us. As we resumed our posts on the patio, reflecting on the evening, I realized this was less about the traditional roles we thought we were supposed to fit into and more about the enduring bond we were crafting, one layered with acceptance and understanding. So, as we walked back inside hand in hand, faces beaming with a quiet joy only we could decipher, the night felt alive, vibrant. Not just from the glittering fairy lights or the cheers erupting from friends but from the rekindled spark of our friendship. We had navigated the gray areas, and life, with all its messiness, was still beautiful. And maybe that's the real celebration. I never thought my birthday would cause such a stir at work, but here we are. It all started when I was chatting with one of my clients, Louise, during a routine meeting about her project. She's a lovely woman, full of energy, and somehow, amid our usual discussions about budgets and timelines, my birthday came up. I casually mentioned that it was just a week away. I thought nothing of it until I overheard Louise bringing it up to my coworkers later on. That's when I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to share a piece of personal information with a client, it was another to hear her reprimanding my team for not remembering my birthday. "How could you forget? It's the least you could do," she'd exclaimed, her tone laced with disbelief. I could feel my cheeks burning as I listened from the other side of the office, trying to fade into the wall as I felt the weight of each word. "I mean, I like my birthday, but I also know it's not a holiday that everyone should mark on their calendars. I'm not one to seek attention or make a fuss over it," but the embarrassment was magnified when I noticed my coworkers awkwardly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. It began to snowball into something much bigger, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had triggered this because I had been too open. I considered messaging Louise to downplay her reaction, but then I worried it might just make her think I agreed with her. Either way, I knew I had inadvertently set my coworkers up for an uncomfortable situation, and now I was stuck wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. The office turned into this strange battlefield of awkward smiles and half-hearted birthday wishes, and despite my attempts to mask my feelings, I couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about the whole ordeal. Was I the asshole for sharing my birthday in the first place? Should I have anticipated that it might end up being a spectacle? As I left work that evening, I kept replaying the day in my head, questioning my choice to disclose something so simple yet loaded with social ramifications. I could hear snippets of conversations echoing in my mind, Louise's words haunting me, "You deserve better." Did I? Was it really a big deal for others to forget? I had planned to shrug it off, but now I felt like I'd sparked a drama that could have stayed dormant. Reflecting back now, I realize it was possibly just a lesson in setting boundaries. Maybe I do hold some responsibility for oversharing, but I couldn't shake the notion that others should also respect the space of personal milestones. Fast forward a few days, my coworkers did make an effort to celebrate, albeit small and awkwardly, as they surprised me with a cake during lunch. There were smiles, laughter, and an unspoken truce in the air. But even then, as I blew out the candles, I had the nagging thought of how easily a simple birthday mention could ignite such confusion and pressure. It made me wonder about how often we unintentionally make simple things complicated for ourselves and others, all while trying to connect. So, was I the asshole? Maybe a bit, but we're all learning how to navigate this tangled web of human interactions together, and perhaps that's the real gift we can give each other. The day after my birthday celebration, I came in to find the atmosphere at the office tinged with tension, like the unsettling silence before a storm. My heart sank a bit. I worried that whatever truce we had formed during the cake outing was fragile, and I hadn't fully realized how profound a small detail, my birthday, could disrupt our workplace harmony. The client, a woman named Sandra, had been with our firm for a couple of years, and though her expectations were often daunting, she had become someone I regarded with a mix of respect and caution. By late morning, just as I was settling into yet another round of emails, she called me into her corner office. With her polished, efficient demeanor, she casually mentioned how my coworkers had eviled my birthday, but then proceeded to express her utter disapproval of their forgetfulness. It's honestly shocking how they didn't even acknowledge it. Everyone should celebrate those little moments, she said, shaking her head, her tone pointed and almost accusatory. Honestly, I had never thought much about how to gauge others' reactions to my birthday. I disclosed this fact in what I thought was a light-hearted manner, just casual chit-chat, but instead, it felt like I dropped a bomb on her perceptions of my coworkers. The weight of her disappointment settled heavily on my chest, and I stumbled over my words, trying to defend a bunch of well-meaning people who were, admittedly, not always attentive but were far from malicious. As I left her office, an uncomfortable swirl of emotions bubbled inside me. I wondered where negligence ended and ignorance began. Did I have a right to be upset that they hadn't celebrated? Sure, but spending my birthday celebrating with cake brought me joy, not resentment. Still, her words echoed in my mind throughout the day, creating an uneasy tension that gnawed at the back of my brain. As the week progressed, I noticed Sandra growing more agitated with my team. Small complaints escalated into dramatic statements. "I expect better," she said during one of our weekly project meetings, rubbing her temple as if the world's woes lay on her shoulders. My coworkers exchanged glances, their unease felt like a strained rope, nearly ready to snap. I found myself in a precarious position, loving my team while also recognizing Sandra's discomfort, which had blossomed into an incongruous empathy. But did I have a stake in this? Should I have kept my mouth shut about my birthday? It was as if I had unintentionally thrust myself into the role of mediator, which only amplified the urgency of the whole situation. I realized that this spiral could only worsen if my team wanted a solid working relationship with someone as pivotal as Sandra. So, out of sheer desperation, I decided it was time to bring everyone together for an honest chat. I couldn't let this disruption continue swirling without some clarity. I called a meeting, not in the conference room, but in the cozy local cafe down the street, an escape from the intense corporate atmosphere. As I spoke, voicing my feelings about the situation, there was an unexpected silence. I could see the light of recognition flicker in my coworkers' eyes. I was no longer just airing a grievance but revealing my vulnerability. They shared how they sometimes felt lost in the busyness and, admittedly, how they had forgotten dates of significance in their own lives too. It was a moment of liberation, like we were all unwrapping a big fabric blanket that had been suffocating us. Together, we acknowledged that while we didn't celebrate my birthday as we could have, it didn't define how we valued each other. The conversation deepened, evolving into an understanding that we were all learning to respect one another's feelings and acknowledge celebrations big and small. Afterward, I had a real talk with Sandra. It wasn't easy, but I decided to be upfront. I explained that while I appreciated her taking an interest in my birthday, I also saw how this had inadvertently strained relationships within my team. To my surprise, she listened. The hardened front softened just a bit. She admitted it had struck a nerve, realizing she often placed high expectations not just onto others, but on herself as well. It was a reckoning for both of us, one that we navigated into understanding rather than confrontation. And so, while my birthday had sparked something unsettling, it also unearthed an opportunity for connection. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted. There was less tension, more laughter in the office, and even hints of planned celebrations for upcoming occasions. I learned that sometimes being the catalyst for tough conversations wasn't so much about assuming a role of blame or validation but about opening a door for understanding. I felt less like I was wading through unsteady emotional waters and more like I was standing on solid ground. Reflecting on it now, maybe there was never a concrete answer to whether I was the asshole. Maybe what mattered was the fact that we all had to communicate, flawed as we might be, and through that, we grew. I think we're all figuring it out, and who knows? Perhaps the next birthday will be more about the celebration of connection than a single forgotten date. As the weeks rolled on after that birthday, I felt a subtle shift not just within myself, but in the dynamics of the office. It was as if we had collectively let out a breath we didn't even know we were holding. Conversations became easier, lighter, and I could see my coworkers making a real effort to connect beyond just the sterile exchange of emails and deadlines. We had been teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, and somehow, that cake had nudged us back into a healthier rhythm. Here's the thing, I'd always been the quiet one, dragging my feet into the background while my louder colleagues basked in the spotlight. But in this newfound openness, I found myself stepping forward more, sharing ideas during our meetings, even leading a brainstorming session one chilly Thursday morning. The sense of camaraderie grew, and for once, I didn't dread Monday mornings. It was like we were tuning up a symphony, each of us finding our notes and harmonizing together, a far cry from where we had been just the month before. Then came Tasha's email. She was one of the most ambitious project managers I'd ever met, a real firecracker. Her bright personality could light up even the dullest meeting, and maybe because I respected her so much, it stung more when I saw the subject line, "Can I ask a favor?" I braced myself as I clicked it open. She needed help preparing for a presentation, a significant pitch to our higher-ups. The kind of deal that could elevate our entire team. Despite my earlier hesitation, I felt a spark of energy flow through me with the prospect of collaborating with her. There was a boldness in saying yes that I hadn't recognized before. We spent hours piecing together our ideas, and as we worked, I shared a little more of myself, my thoughts, my fears about failing, the weight of those uncelebrated years. "This is good stuff, you know?" Tasha said, her eyes lighting up as she read through the bullet points I had drafted. "You should be more vocal about this stuff, honestly. Don't wait for the others to notice you." I remember chuckling, feeling a warmth spread across my face. After our session, she scooted her chair closer, as if she was initiating a secret mission. "Since you're, actually celebrating birthdays now, what are your thoughts about throwing a little office party next month?" Her words lingered long after I left the conference room. Doubts flitted through my mind. What if it was received poorly? What if everyone forgot again? But I silenced those whispers. I wanted to embrace this new sense of connection, to lean into the unpretentious chaos of birthdays and celebrate the chaotic beauty of our imperfect human existence. So I sent out a quirky, light-hearted invitation to the team, asking them to participate in what I cheekily called my half-birthday bash because, sure, why not make it more absurd? I even set up a small wishing wall with sticky notes where everyone could leave behind little notes of encouragement or inside jokes. When the day arrived, there was laughter and genuine excitement. We all wore colorful party hats, and for a moment, none of us were focused on deadlines or corporate structures. We were just a bunch of folks sharing laughter and memories. As we all gathered around the table, I realized I wasn't solely championing the significance of birthdays for my own sake anymore. I was celebrating our efforts to connect in ways that transcended just remembering a date. The simple act of showing up for one another, of taking interest, of daring to be vulnerable amidst laughter and goofy decorations, it meant something far more poignant than I could have articulated a few months ago. I watched as my colleagues swapped stories and shared awkward moments, each little tidbit weaving us closer together. And as I blew out candles again, half a year's worth of dreams and aspirations, I knew that we had moved beyond being just coworkers. We were becoming something more like a family. So, was I the asshole for mentioning my birthday? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, I realized it was never just about that single cake or who remembered what date. It was about giving ourselves permission to be seen, to be celebrated, and to navigate the complexities of our relationships. Maybe, just maybe, the real lesson I learned wasn't about birthdays at all. It was about the richness of presence, of kindness, and allowing each other to grow, one imperfect step at a time. When I first stepped into Matt's house, the air was thick with memories, his collection of vinyl records lining the walls, a half-finished puzzle sitting on the dining table, and that unmistakable scent of sandalwood from the candles he loved to burn. We had shared this space for less than a year before tragedy struck. I still remember the call like it was yesterday, the way my heart sank when his sister's voice trembled through the line, telling me he was gone. Just like that, at 33, He left this world in a car accident, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of grief while still trying to honor the life we built together. It didn't take long for his parents to come knocking. They were polite but firm, suggesting that the house should return to them now that Matt was gone. "It's family property," they said, glossing over the emotional tapestry woven in every corner. "He wouldn't have wanted you burdened with it." I remember standing in the living room, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Their voices grew louder, demanding a surrender I wasn't ready to make. Thoughts swirled inside my head. Was I being selfish for wanting to keep the place that had become a part of me? Matt had always said home was where you felt safe, and this was my sanctuary, my last connection to him. But how could I deny his parents their grief? The guilt of wanting to hold onto this space while knowing they were mourning their son weighed heavily on my conscience. After all, they'd raised him, loved him longer than I ever had. I spent sleepless nights pacing through the rooms, retracing footsteps, every laughter-filled evening, every quiet morning spent in the kitchen with the sunlight spilling in like honey. Slowly, I realized that giving up the house felt like giving up Matt, as if I would be erasing a part of our story. I turned to friends for advice, and they all had differing opinions. Some painted me as the villain, others told me that I had every right to keep the place that held my memories. With their conflicting perspectives echoing in my head, I felt even more paralyzed. Who was I in all of this? After a few weeks, I agreed to meet with his parents, hoping for a solution. They arrived, looking weary and fragile, the lines of grief etched deeper in their faces, and we sat at his dining table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals. What started as an organized discussion devolved into tears, accusations, and desperate pleas. "This is our family home," they argued, while I felt my heart shatter, wondering if I was somehow the villain of this story. Each day brought fresh unease, and I complicated the matter by starting to dream of selling the house instead, a solution that felt easier, a way to turn our shared life into something tangible, something that could finally support me instead of haunt me. But would it be a betrayal? A few days after that confrontation, tangled in thoughts and half-formed plans, I found myself sitting on his old couch. Wrapped in his blanket, scrolling through my phone aimlessly. I stumbled upon a support forum where stories of similar heartbreak were shared, and as I read, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. The threads resonated with tales of loss, love, and rebirth. It struck me that sometimes, betrayal comes not from holding on but from losing the courage to be honest. I penned a heartfelt letter to Matt's parents, pouring out my feelings and fears, explaining my desire to cherish his memory by keeping the house. I confessed that I didn't want to erase his existence. It felt sacrilegious to me. Weeks passed, and after what felt like an eternity, they finally responded. In their reply, surprisingly gentle and understanding, they acknowledged my pain and agreed to a shared arrangement, allowing me to stay while also ensuring they could visit whenever they pleased. It was a relief, a patchwork solution that somehow felt right. I could take my time to heal, and in turn, they could reconnect with the son they had lost. Days turned to weeks as I settled into the fractured routine of grief and healing, small moments of joy seeping into my days. The last time I lit one of Matt's favorite candles, I didn't cry but smiled, remembering his laugh as it filled the room. Sure, the journey was still messy, and the scars of loss wouldn't fade quickly, but I had found a way to carry his memory forward, still not entirely sure whether I was the asshole, but at least I was no longer alone in my decision. Life, I learned, is not simple, and sometimes, dwelling in the gray is precisely where we find our way back to the light. It's funny how life has a way of tying everything up in knots before it unwinds just when you think you're at the end of your rope. After letting go of the weight of being the asshole back then, I immersed myself in the remembrance of Matt, letting those moments pull me toward healing. I decorate the small apartment we had together with things that reminded me of him, a collection of books he loved, a few of his favorite band posters that I regretfully took down but now hung again in proud defiance of how much I cherished those years together. It felt like a tribute to our time, despite the oft-discussed future that we'd never get to have. But there was still that looming question of Matt's house, the place where we shared both laughter and deep, loving conversations, and it weighed heavily on my mind after his parents reached out again. I remember exactly where I was when his mother called. I had been curled up on the couch, wrapped in a quilt that Matt had snagged from a thrift store because he loved the colors, bright orange patches that felt like the sun. Her voice was steady but trembled with an undercurrent of sadness as she filled me in on the details I'd already processed but hadn't fully faced. They wanted to discuss the house. It was a direct route back to the thoughts I tried to bury, that sense of obligation to return it to his family, to honor his memory alongside theirs, but it was also the thought of giving up a piece of my heart that kept me from saying yes. I had worried out loud to my friend Hannah about what this might mean. Would I be betraying our love? Would I be turning my back on the countless memories that literally echoed in those walls? Hannah had listened patiently over coffee, her blonde curls bouncing as she furrowed her brow. "You're not abandoning anything," she assured me, sipping her steaming latte. "You're just considering what Matty would have wanted." But the truth was, I didn't know what he would have wanted. We had never discussed what would happen if things went sideways. In my heart, I knew that building a life together in that space was an extension of our relationship, and I didn't want to relinquish it to the sharp edges of grief my memories sometimes morphed into. Days turned into weeks, each one brimming with contemplation. I thought of the countless summer nights we spent on the back porch, nursing our drinks, our dreams feeling limitless under a blanket of stars. But then, conflicting feelings began swirling in my mind. His parents deserved their piece of him too, he was their son after all. So there I was, caught in that relentless tide of internal debate, pacing the hardwood floor that hid the scuffs he had created by shuffling his feet, overthinking it, losing sleep while part of me fought against part of me while the other part stayed quiet, all in tandem. Eventually, in a moment steeped in courage derived from deep love, I called Matt's parents. My stomach flipped as I dialed their number. I could hear the hesitation in their voices when I explained how much I wanted to keep the house, thanking them for understanding even as they expressed disappointment. But to my surprise, they didn't lash out. They were gracious, even supportive, managing to communicate the essential truth, that love doesn't adhere to walls. It flows freely, molding the space within. They didn't ask for more, they just wanted to know I was okay, and somewhere in that conversation, I realized I was finally stepping into my own life, one part grieving and another part moving forward. A few months later, I found myself back at that house one bright Saturday morning, nostalgia flooding in as I prepared to host a small gathering for a few friends. As I laid out snacks and popped the cork on a bottle of wine, thoughts of Matt slipped in like a gentle breeze. I could almost hear him making jokes in the background, a playful reminder of how he used to turn even the most mundane moments into laughter. I stepped outside, leaning against the porch rail, watching the sunlight dance in the leaves overhead. A soft touch brushed the back of my mind, a whisper of reassurance that I was on the right path. By finally carving out my own space, I remembered us while allowing that to be an open door for new laughter, new memories, still honoring the love we had built. I might never fully know if I was right or wrong in my choice, but I finally felt on solid ground, free from the burden of guilt that had been my constant companion. The house was just the beginning. It wasn't the anchor that tied me to his memory but rather a vessel to traverse new journeys. As the laughter filled the air that evening, it dawned on me, the ghosts of our past can coexist beautifully, quietly guiding us, as long as we remember to live for the moments yet to come. Sitting in the midst of friends, I realized it was a world I hadn't fully immersed myself in until now. The chatter around the room was a comforting hum, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I watched as Jenna, one of our closest friends, picked up the guitar Matt used to play. She strummed a few chords, glancing at me with that lopsided grin. "We should all sing one of Matt's favorites," she suggested. My heart flickered, half in joy and half in trepidation. It felt like an intrusion into my sacred memories, the kind you protect fiercely yet crave to share. But I nodded, the warmth of camaraderie coaxing me to lean into it. As the first notes of "Hey There Delilah" filled the room, I felt an unsettling twinge. It was his song, one that resonated with our long-distance relationship when he traveled for work, me lying on the couch listening to him through blurry phone lines. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the music to wrap around me like a gentle embrace. Instead of sorrow flooding my senses, I found fragments of joy rising within me, memories flashing like starlight. By the time Jenna finished the song, I was smiling, knee-deep in nostalgia yet buoyed by the laughter echoing around me. I looked around, and my friends were there, sharing in the moment, each of them carrying their own piece of Matt with them. Emily, with her wild spirit, was mixing cocktails in the kitchen, trying to recreate his infamous mojito. "Totally nailed it or totally failed it," she joked, and we erupted in laughter again. Yet, even amidst the warmth, I felt the shadows whispering uncertainty in my ear. The house, Matt's sanctuary, lingered at the edge of my mind. I was still torn over his parents' insistence on wanting it, the home that cradled our laughs and sheltered our dreams now looming as a point of contention. I recalled their faces, the raw pain in their eyes during the memorial, how they clung to relics of their son's life, each item a tangible piece of his existence. The texts continued, gently nudging at me, calling for decisions I hadn't yet made. That night, I slipped out to the balcony, the cool air prickling my skin. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars, which felt so far away yet impossibly close. Did holding on to the house mean letting go or holding tight? There was a truth to letting it go that felt almost liberating, a part of me that knew Matt would want me to make memories in a space that reflected the life I was building. But there was another part. Brittle and fearful, that worried letting go would mean losing him all over again. I scolded myself for these thoughts. It felt selfish to cling to a home when his parents were grieving in a way I might never fully grasp. After my friends left, I found myself wandering through the rooms, each space heavy with love and loss. I ran my fingers across the walls, the place filled with echoes of laughter, late-night talks, and raw vulnerability. This wasn't merely wood and nails, it was where I had grown as a person and where Matt and I had spun dreams together. It felt sacred. Eventually, I settled on the couch, wrapping a blanket tightly around me, half seeking comfort and half searching for clarity. In the moments that followed, I found myself reaching for my phone, not to text the parents, but to type out my thoughts. I contemplated how the house could be a kind of bridge, a way to honor Matt's legacy by hosting friends and writing and illuminating his memories. As I typed, it became clear, I didn't have to choose between keeping it and giving it away. Rather, what I truly needed was to transform it. A new purpose emerged from the grief. It could serve as a community space, a haven where Matt's spirit could linger in laughter and shared experiences. Finally, with a steady breath, I hit send on a message to his parents. I invited them to visit, expressing that while I understood their desire for the house, I envisioned a shared future where the space could be dedicated to honoring a life well lived. I knew they might not understand, and my heart raced at the thought of their reaction. My fingers trembled as I set my phone down, each heartbeat resounding in anticipation. I might still be navigating uncertainty, but perhaps, just maybe, I'd found a way through the haze. The stars twinkled above as I finally closed my eyes, letting the hum of memories blend seamlessly with the promise of new beginnings, holding tightly to the idea that love doesn't diminish, it can evolve, just as we do. So, look, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I'm a single parent to a quirky 7-year-old named Lily, and life is already a bit chaotic as it is, balancing work and school schedules while ensuring my kid has a stable home environment. For the most part, I've tried to keep things light and flowing. But then there's my Aunt Claire, bless her heart, who's always had this knack for pushing my buttons. She's one of those well-meaning relatives who just can't help but give unsolicited advice, and a lot of it revolves around how I'm raising Lily. Everything from what she eats to how I let her express herself creatively, which includes glitter, a lot of glitter. Recently, we had a family gathering for my brother's birthday, and it felt like Aunt Claire was on a mission. I could see her shooting judgmental glances my way whenever she thought Lily was being too loud or too independent, like a hawk stalking its prey. Finally, when she suggested I should take Lily's art supplies away because she thought they were too messy, something inside me just snapped. I remember looking at her, my palms sweaty, and saying something like, "Aunt Claire, if you can't respect my decisions as a parent, then maybe it's best if Lily doesn't come over anymore." The room fell silent, and I instantly regretted saying it, even as the words left my mouth. I could see the shock on her face, and I immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I really okay with cutting my kid off from one of the few safe spaces she had, just to make a stand? I could almost hear my aunt's heart breaking, but it wasn't just her heartbreak that weighed on me. I felt the burden of being the bad guy in my own family story. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the confrontation in my head, grappling with feelings of anger directed toward Aunt Claire for being so critical, and guilt for possibly taking something away from Lily that she enjoyed. A few days later, she called me, voice trembling, to ask if we could have a chat. When we met, I could tell she was hurt, but she quickly shifted gears to talking about how she feels she's just looking out for Lily. I snapped back like a rubber band. I'm doing the best I can. If you feel that I'm not, then don't come around. After that, I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. My responsibility is to Lily, to protect her joy and creativity. Weeks passed without Aunt Claire, and honestly, Lily asked about her once or twice, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front. Then the real kicker happened. I overheard Lily talking to her friend about how she didn't want to go to Aunt Claire's house anyway because adults should let kids be kids. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, and I knew something had shifted. I kept reflecting on whether it was worth it to stand my ground, and while I missed the idea of family dinners and the warmth they brought, I realized my first priority is protecting my daughter from unrealistic expectations. Time marched on, and eventually, Aunt Claire reached out to see if we could start fresh, possibly meet up for donuts at our favorite bakery. I hesitated but texted back, "Let's try." I still don't know if I'm entirely ready to forgive, but as I write this, I feel hopeful. Maybe we could learn to communicate better, create a new understanding. Who knows? Maybe even my Aunt Claire will learn that sometimes, love means letting go a little. So where does that leave me? Honestly, still a little unsure but standing firm in my convictions. AITA? I guess it's all part of this messy parenting journey. As I sat in my tiny kitchen, steam swirling up from the coffee mug cradled between my palms, I couldn't shake the mix of apprehension and anticipation that clung to me after Claire's message. It felt like pulling on an old sweater that I used to adore but had somehow forgotten the fit of. I replayed our last encounter over and over in my head. My mind flickered back to the confrontation at my son's birthday party, the glares exchanged over the toppings for the cake. "It's gluten-free, Aunt Claire, because Danny has a sensitivity," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady as she argued that I was being overprotective. Every word of my conviction had been met with a wave of indignation from her, a woman who had once been my confidant, my ally in navigating the familial chaos. I couldn't help but feel the weight of disappointment settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yes, Aunt Claire had always been a source of wisdom, her stories rich with familial lore, but somewhere along the way, respect for my parenting decisions had dissolved into a pile of unsolicited advice and judgment. So here I was, contemplating a meetup that could potentially heal old wounds while still feeling the prick of betrayal. When I agreed to try, it felt like I was tiptoeing back to a place I used to know, a place that felt welcoming yet dangerous. Would this conversation lead to understanding or reignite old arguments? Would it be a stepping stone towards rebuilding or just another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries? My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a reminder pinging me about the donut date. This wasn't just coffee with a friend, it involved family dynamics that felt more complicated than navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The clatter of my son's toys in the background momentarily distracted me, grounding me in my role as a mother, the constant evaluator of who gets to influence my child's life. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that parenting is as much about creating a safe space for my son as it is about ensuring he understands the nuances of relationships. The next morning, I found myself outside our favorite bakery, the scent of warm pastries flooding my senses. Claire was already there when I arrived, her coffee in hand, her expression a strange mix of hopeful and apologetic. "Hey," I said softly, an uncertain smile creeping on my face. She looked a bit older, perhaps weighed down by life's burdens or the realization, possibly, that she had crossed lines. We chatted about the usual, the weather, what a rainstorm had done to our childhood tree fort, but there it was, lingering beneath the surface, that tension between what I hoped we could be and the reality of our strained relationship. "I know I haven't been the best aunt," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the donut display like she was trying to find the right words hiding among the pastries. I wanted to believe her, to embrace this moment, but doubt bubbled within me. It's hard for me to see you navigate parenting. I feel like I have so much to offer, but maybe it's not what you want." Her honesty was refreshing yet disarming, and I found myself wrestling with the desire to let her back into my life, while also keeping my son out of the line of fire. "I appreciate that, Claire," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's crucial for me to set boundaries, especially for Danny's sake. I want him to grow up feeling safe and understood, not under scrutiny." As I spoke, I registered the flicker of realization in her eyes, a softened understanding. We spent the next hour unpacking the layers of our relationship, trying to navigate what love looks like when respect feels fragile. I shared my experiences as a single parent, how the choices I made were never arbitrary but deeply considered, always revolving around my child's well-being. And to my surprise, Claire listened, really listened. I caught moments where her expression shifted from defensiveness to contemplation, as if she was beginning to grasp that our love might need to take on a different shape. We hugged before parting ways, an uncertain but genuine gesture. As I drove home, a sense of cautious optimism filled me. It felt like we had planted the seeds for a new beginning, though I knew they would take time to grow. Would she fully respect my parenting choices? Only time would tell. After all, trust is like a delicate flower, it takes patience to bloom again after being trampled. That evening, as Danny clambered onto my lap for story time, I felt the warmth of possibility surrounding us. Sure, I was still a little unsure, still grappling with the anxiety that came with family dynamics, but I felt lighter. AITA? Maybe in someone's narrative, but in mine, It felt more like I was pushing through the chaos, determined to carve out our peace. I sighed contentedly, holding my son tighter, hoping both Claire and I were learning that forgiveness is often found in the spaces between boundaries and bravery. That evening, as we sat on the couch with the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a gentle glow around us, I couldn't help but marvel at how sweetly innocent Danny was. He squirmed a bit, all too eager to dive into his favorite story. "Mom, read me the one with the dragon," he chirped, his little arms flapping with excitement. I grinned, the kind of smile that muscles in your face almost forget how to make until a moment like this brings it back. I pulled him closer, the sweet smell of his freshly washed hair drifting upward, wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It was magical how one little creature had the power to transform a tumultuous day into something warm and bright, yet deep down, I still felt that twinge of unease about Claire. It's funny how life has this way of testing your limits. After our spat, I had launched into a whirlwind of introspection, replaying every argument, every well-meaning but misguided advice she'd offered, as if retracing my steps might uncover the right answer. Understanding what I wanted from our relationship was one hurdle, but keeping Danny safe from the fallout felt like climbing a mountain in stilettos. I felt at that moment, cradling the little joy in my arms, that he was my best shot at a serene future. As we settled into the story, Danny clapped and giggled at the silly voices I used for the characters. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if Claire, in her stubbornness, couldn't respect my boundaries again? I wanted my son to grow without the weight of adult conflicts pressing down on him. The heavy thought stuck with me like a burr under my skin. When I put him to bed later, I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, the soft rhythm of his breathing echoing back to me the peacefulness I wished for our family. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and I nearly jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Claire was texting again. A simple message this time, thinking about that donut date. "Do you think we can get it right this time?" I stared at the screen, my heart ambivalent, caught somewhere between wanting to build bridges and fearing the crumbling of foundations. I typed and deleted, before finally settling on a cautious, "I hope so. But there are some things we need to discuss first." I hit send, a mixture of hopeful optimism and drumming dread billowing inside me. The next morning, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window, the soft rays illuminating the world outside. I thought about how the hardest conversations often end up being the most crucial. Finding a balance between love, boundaries, and forgiveness, it felt less like a checklist and more like a dance. A complicated one. When our donut date rolled around, I wore a smile that only half masked my nervousness. Danny sat beside me, oblivious to the underlying currents, munching on a glazed treat and occasionally dipping into my plate for the sprinkles. Claire arrived, and as she walked through the bakery door, I saw a hint of the old warmth in her eyes, but behind it lay uncertainty. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the patience that comes with healing. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the ice as we settled into a booth. "I believe in giving this a second shot. But we need some ground rules." "What are you talking about?" she responded, a hint of confusion in her voice, her brow wrinkling. I felt my heart race as I tried to articulate what I had been mulling over for weeks. "It's just, when it comes to Danny, I need you to respect my decisions as a parent." The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, shifting the mood between us. Claire's expression wavered, shifting from surprise to contemplation. "I understand. I think I've been stubborn about how I view things, and maybe it's time for a new perspective," she eventually admitted, reaching for a napkin as if to wipe away unspoken tension. As we talked, nibbling on donuts and sipping coffee, a sort of thaw took place. We laid raw feelings on the table, sharing our histories and misunderstandings, each crumb of pastry like a building block toward repairing our fractured relationship. I could see that she genuinely wanted to make amends, but the real test would be in her actions moving forward. Later, outside the bakery, Danny bounced ahead of us, trailing his fingers along the brick wall and giggling as he tried to capture every shadow cast by the trees overhead. In that moment, witnessing his innocent joy, I turned to Claire and said, "Thank you for showing up today." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied, her voice softer, more genuine. "I really want to be a part of his life, our lives, but I promise I will respect the boundaries you've set." As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling through me. Maybe I had been too cautious in some ways, but I didn't think I was the villain of this story. I was just a mom trying to carve out a safe and loving space for her son while balancing the complexities of family entanglements. I hugged Danny a little tighter as we walked home, whispering to him that life is often imperfect but always worth navigating together. As he chattered away about his favorite dragon stories, I realized that even when it feels chaotic, there's beauty and growth, both in ourselves and in relationships. So, was I the asshole? Maybe to some, but in this chapter of my life, as messy as it was, I was simply doing my best to foster love and understanding. The journey was still unfolding, but I felt ready for what came next, embracing the hope that blooms even in the darkest corners. I never thought a simple name could create such a rift in my relationship, but here I am, standing at the crossroads of family dynamics and the yearning for self-identity. My name is Mia, a perfectly ordinary name that I've carried my whole life, yet somehow, my boyfriend's mom insists on calling me Princess. I know, right? It sounds adorable, maybe even endearing at first, but let me tell you, it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I'm all for playful nicknames, but there's something about being labeled as a princess that felt patronizing, especially coming from a woman I was supposed to impress. The first time I met Beth, Scott's mom, I walked into their cozy living room, filled with laughter and the smell of her famous lasagna. Scott introduced me, and she looked me up and down, beaming, and said, "Welcome, Princess. You must be the one who stole my son's heart." I laughed, played along, hoping this was just a passing fluke of warmth. But it stuck. Over dinner, she didn't falter, addressing me as Princess every chance she got, even as I self-deprecatingly corrected her, "Just Mia is fine." But the more I said it, the more she smiled as though I were merely being modest. It became this strange game, this insistence on seeing me through a lens that didn't feel like me at all. Fast forward to a couple of months later, and I finally reached my boiling point. It was a chilly Friday night, and I was about to join Scott and his mom for some takeout. As soon as I walked in, Beth turned her head, and with that wide grin, she exclaimed, "Hello, Princess. Ready for a royal feast?" I felt my stomach clench. My heart raced. It's not like I wanted to confront her, but something in me snapped. "Can you please just call me Mia?" The kitchen fell silent. Scott's fork paused mid-air, and his eyes were wide, as if I'd set off fireworks in the middle of a library. Beth's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then, slowly, to hurt. "Oh dear, I thought you liked it. I thought it was cute." She trailed off. My heart sank. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But I felt so invisible, like I was wrapped in this blanket of a persona that wasn't mine. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "I appreciate that you mean well, but it's just not me. I'm not a princess, I'm just Mia. And I want to be seen as me." I could feel the tension crackling in the air, a suffocating silence overshadowing the warm aroma of the lasagna. Scott shifted uncomfortably, and I could tell he was caught in the middle. He sighed, "Mom, I think Mia is just trying to make her own space in our lives." The moment hung heavy between us until finally, after what felt like an eternity, Beth let out a gentle sigh. "I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'll call you Mia from now on." Relief washed over me, but then guilt sank in. Was I too harsh? Had I robbed her of her fun? Later that night, as Scott and I lay in bed, I whispered, "Do you think I overreacted?" He turned to me, brushing my hair back gently. "No, you needed to speak up. It's part of who you are. I love you for being authentic." I closed my eyes, accepting that love sometimes requires discomfort. I still felt a bit unsettled about how things would change between Beth and me, but I hoped this was the starting point for a more honest relationship. A week later, as we gathered for a family game night, I nervously walked in, stealing a glance at Beth. I braced myself for another princess, but instead, she looked up, smiled gently, and said, "Hey, Mia. Ready to kick some butt at Uno?" I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. Maybe this was the bridge we needed in a relationship that could thrive on authenticity. In the end, I realized that asking to be called by my own name wasn't about being a diva, it was about claiming my identity. As I slipped into the familiar rhythm of laughter and light-hearted banter, I understood that sometimes, standing firm is what allows us to grow closer. In that moment, surrounded by the colorful cards and the comfortable smell of popcorn floating through the air, I felt a surprising sense of relief wash over me. Sure, there was an awkwardness that still lingered from my last confrontation with Beth, the way her face had hardened, if only for a moment, when I first brought up the whole Princess Mia situation, but now that felt like a small bump in the road compared to the joy of playing with my boyfriend, Jake, and his mom. As we began our game, I could feel the tension ease, replaced by the playful competition that made family game nights both charming and exasperating in equal measure. With each round, I caught myself stealing glances at Beth, who was animatedly counting her cards, her laughter ringing out with each draw that wasn't what she'd hoped for. I marveled at how her jovial nature seemed to melt any lingering awkwardness I had been carrying. "How about a little wager?" I suggested, half joking, as I threw down a wild card and let the red skip across the table. "Loser does the dishes." Beth raised an eyebrow, the competitive spark igniting in her eyes. "You're on, girl." The energy fizzed between us as we rallied to see who'd end the night victorious, whether it was my careful strategy or Beth's exuberance that took the win. I forgot momentarily about the years and expectations that often hung uncomfortably between us. Yet, still, the question of my identity lingered in the back of my mind. I thought back to that uneasy conversation in the kitchen just a week ago, where I had hesitated, yet ultimately decided to stand up for myself. I'd never wanted to be confrontational, but being called princess felt like I was being funneled into a box that didn't fit. As much as I appreciated all the love Beth had poured into making Jake into the wonderful person he was, I was my own person, and that deserved to be recognized. As the night wore on, something seemed to shift in Beth's demeanor too. She started to share more stories about Jake's childhood, how he'd once spent a summer building a treehouse in their backyard and how he had stubbornly insisted on decorating it with stars and a neon green paint that he'd picked himself. Hearing these anecdotes not only brought me closer to Jake, they lured me into Beth's world, deepening our connection. After a few rounds, Beth laid her cards down with a flourish and looked straight at me, determination etched across her face. "All right, Mia," she began, the tender lilt of her voice interrupting my thoughts, "I think we need to have a real talk." My heart sank a little. Had I overstepped after all? Was it too soon? "Let's do it," I replied, summoning my courage. She smiled again, but this time there was a vulnerability beneath the surface. "I know I can be a bit old-fashioned, and princess was just how I thought I was connecting with you. I truly care about you, so I'm sorry if it's made you feel uncomfortable." The words hung in the air, and in that charged silence, I realized we were both learning in that moment. "I appreciate that, Beth," I said, feeling a swell of warmth toward her. "I really do value our relationship. I just want you to know the real me, Mia, who's not just Jake's girlfriend but someone you can let into your heart, too." Her eyes softened as she nodded, and a new understanding blossomed between us. "Then let's figure that out. Call me whatever you want, just as long as it sounds like we're a family, growing together." I've often noticed how the most awkward moments in life can blossom into the most beautiful connections if we allow ourselves to address them with honesty. As the evening came to a close and we both recognized the earlier tension had melted away, I couldn't help but reflect on how freeing it felt to claim my identity not just in front of Beth but also for myself. Later that evening, as I headed to the door, Jake wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "I saw that," he said with a teasing grin, "the way you two were just vibing. I'm so proud of you." I squeezed his hand, and the warmth of the night lingered in my heart. "Thanks, Jake. I think we're getting somewhere." Even as I walked away from the house, I understood that family dynamics could be messy. They could get bruised but also healed in ways I never anticipated, sometimes just by the act of speaking your truth. As I walked down the familiar path leading to Jake's car, my heart beat with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The stars twinkled in the cool night sky, each one a little affirmation of the night's progress. "You know," I said, breaking the silence as Jake opened the door for me, "I didn't realize how important that moment with Beth was until it happened." He settled into the driver's seat, glancing at me with curious eyes, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" I leaned back, trying to articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "It's not just about her calling me Mia," I continued, hesitating just enough that I could capture the weight of my words. "It's about being seen. I've felt like a ghost in this relationship with her, like I'm just Jake's girlfriend, you know?" Jake nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I get it. You're more than just that title." The way he said it made my heart flutter, and for once, I felt relieved rather than anxious. "Yeah, and it made me realize, if I don't speak up for my identity, who will? I want her to know me as I am, not as she wishes I'd be." The drive felt like a blur, a soothing rhythm of tires on pavement, but my mind raced with thoughts about what lay ahead. Would Beth continue to call me Mia? Would she embrace this side of me that I was beginning to embrace myself? I tried to play it all out in my head, planning for every possible outcome, but each time I spiraled down a potential avenue, I tugged my thoughts back to the moment we had shared over Uno. We arrived at Jake's apartment, and as he opened the door, I followed him into the softly lit space, filled with the scent of his aftershave mixed with the faint aroma of leftover pizza. He turned to me with a playful smile. "Want to play a round of something? Or maybe just talk about your epic Uno strategy?" I laughed, letting the humor cut through the lingering tension. "Let's save the games for tomorrow, but I could definitely use a little unpacking of feelings tonight." I flopped onto the couch, feeling like with each word, I was unzipping a hidden compartment within myself. As the night stretched on, we talked about everything, about my work, my dreams, and of course, Jake's mom, and I could feel every layer of that emotional wall I'd built starting to dissolve. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Beth can be a little tough, but maybe what you did today is what she needs to really get to know you. Sometimes it takes a little push." His words resonated with me, echoing in the corners of my mind. I thought back to all the family dinners where I felt some version of myself being misplaced. But speaking up had planted a seed. Maybe, just maybe, standing my ground would help both me and Beth grow closer as a family. "Maybe I'll bake her some muffins or something the next time I see her," I mused out loud. "Something safe and comforting, like a peace offering." Jake chuckled softly, the sound warm and friendly, like a cozy blanket wrapping around my worries. "You'd bake? I must record this monumental occasion." I rolled my eyes, but the laughter that bubbled to the surface felt genuine, washing over the remnants of yesterday's uncertainty. By the time we settled in, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me. The evening had turned out to be more than just a game, it was an invitation to foster understanding and acceptance. As we talked and laughed late into the night, I realized I was finally shaping the narrative of who I was, actively weaving my identity into the fabric of relationships that meant the most to me. Whether it was with Jake, Beth, or even myself, I was starting to own my story. As sleep pulled me away, I closed my eyes thinking of the possibilities and the small steps ahead. Who knew that a name could open so many doors? For now, I felt peace, accompanied by the gentle heartbeat of a new chapter just beginning. I sat on our faded couch, the kind that had seen better days, staring blankly at the coffee table littered with wedding invitations. My husband, Kyle, had just received one from his sister, and the moment he read the name of the venue, the same place where we'd had our own wedding, the nostalgia washed over me like a tidal wave. But it quickly faded, replaced by an unsettling rush of anxiety. You see, Kyle hadn't spoken to his sister in 2 years. It wasn't one of those petty squabbles that could be brushed aside, it was a feud that began when she belittled our decision to have a child early in our marriage, telling us we were ruining our lives. The words had cut deep, especially because I had struggled with infertility and felt vulnerable in ways I couldn't vocalize. Now, here we were, standing on the precipice of a decision that made my stomach churn. As I watched him thumb through the invitation, I felt this surge of protectiveness rising within me. I knew that if he went, there was a good chance it would escalate into something ugly, and I didn't want to see him hurt again. I hesitated, then finally voiced my concern, choosing my words carefully. "Are you really planning on going?" I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. His expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty, and for a split second, I saw the flicker of ambivalence play across his face, a battle between the desire to reconcile and the fear of rejection that had haunted him for years. I took a breath and laid out my feelings, layering them with severity. He needed to understand that inviting old wounds to a celebration might not be as festive as it seemed. His eyes narrowed, a shadow of disappointment shadowed his features. "So, you want me to just stay home? Don't you want me to try?" The tension thickened in the air, I felt it tightening around us like a noose. I took a moment, biting my lip, knowing I had to be careful. "It's not just about you, Kyle. It's about protecting what we've built together. You can't just walk back into her life as if nothing happened, and I don't want to be there when it all falls apart." The room filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could read his frustration in the way his fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, and it killed me. I never wanted to feel like the villain in this story. I worried that by suggesting he shouldn't go, I was shoving him into a corner, making him choose between family and our life together. It was a painful realization, but the possibility of joy turning into chaos loomed larger than any hope of reconciliation. After a long pause, Kyle finally stood up, the invitation still clutched in his hand, and I watched him walk over to the window, staring out at the street below as if trying to find answers in the mundane world outside. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I really the one keeping him from healing? Or was I merely preserving the peace we had fought so hard to achieve? The truth is, there was no clear answer. In the end, he decided not to go, a choice I silently hoped had been for the best, even if it meant reducing his relationship with his sister to a flickering flame instead of a raging fire. This decision hung over us for weeks, and while it seemed right at the time, it brought a fresh wave of uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? I wished for the distance between him and his sister to dissolve, if only they could talk openly, if only she could see him for who he was now. A few days later, we received a phone call from her. Kyle answered with a mix of hope and trepidation, and I could hear her voice on the other end, barely above a whisper. I held my breath, wishing I could take the weight of this moment away from him. It turned into a long conversation, one I eavesdropped on while pretending to be busy in the kitchen. He was answering her questions cautiously, articulating the hurt without putting blame. When he finally hung up, his eyes were a mixture of relief and residual hurt. "We're going to try again," he said, and I smiled, not because the resolution was solid but because there was a glimmer of hope we hadn't foreseen. With every turn, every moment spent grappling with complex emotions, I realized love isn't just about the easy choices but also about the difficult conversations. A few weeks later, he joined me at the table while I was sorting the wedding invites again. "I think we should go to the wedding," he said softly, and panic flared in my chest. I didn't respond right away. Was I really okay with this? The truth is, I had no idea what the right answer was, but I knew it was a path we'd have to navigate together, no matter how thorny it might be. For what felt like an eternity, I stared at the wedding invites scattered across the table like a map to uncharted territory. Each envelope seemed to pulse with unvoiced questions and unacknowledged tensions, echoing the scramble of my thoughts. "Go to the wedding?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirl of emotions churning inside me. In my mind, I could hear the punctuated laughter of my sister-in-law, Jessica, as I remembered last Thanksgiving, when the family had gathered together, and the warmth of those moments contrasted sharply with the chill that seemed to hang over everything since her engagement. She had never liked me, and I certainly hadn't warmed up to her. My husband, Daniel, had always been the centerpiece of that family, towering tall and sunny, expertly navigating the waves of familial drama with grace. And now, here we were. "You know they'll probably all side with her," I said, the weight of my concern sinking into the space between us. "They'll think I'm just being difficult, as usual. What if we don't go and it pushes you further away from them?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had come to identify with his frustration. "Maybe it's time to confront all that. You're not difficult for wanting to protect your peace." "Protect my peace? I'm not some damsel in distress." The echoes of fighting for my own self-worth danced in my mind, and I hesitated, staring down at the invites again. This wasn't just about a single day, it was about the larger conversation of who we were becoming, together and apart. I felt the moment catch in my throat, the vulnerability hammering at my walls. What happens when you love someone but also know their family, and their history, could drown you in a sea of tides you couldn't escape? "I just want us to be okay," I finally whispered, my heart heavy with doubt. Daniel's expression softened, and in those quiet seconds, I could see the boy who first kissed me under the stars, that same ember of hope flickering in his eyes. "We will be. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The words wrapped around me, a fragile lifeline, and for an instant, I believed in them. But then, silence slipped in, thick and unyielding, filling the cracks of our conversation. The day of the wedding dawned with a mix of excitement and dread. Clouds hung low in the sky, mirroring my uncertainty. As we dressed, I caught myself catching fleeting glimpses of Daniel, adorned in a suit that brought out the shine in his eyes. It was familiar yet filled with an edge of anxiety. I wondered, was he wearing it for them or for us? When we finally arrived at the venue, the air grew heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and inevitable conflict. Jessica was radiant, a knockout in ivory, and even through my resentment, I could feel the magnetic energy she exuded. As I stepped inside, the room seemed to spin. I could see the waves of family swirling around Daniel, pulling him into the currents of chatter. Each hug felt like a mugging, the warmth that enveloped him stealing pieces of the man I loved. "You made it!" one of her relatives exclaimed, and I could tell the words were coated with a hint of surprise. The judgment was palpable, I could feel it prickling against my skin. I held my breath, fighting the urge to turn and flee. I lingered at the edges, watching Daniel greet family members with his disarming charm, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his life. It was only a tentative hey from Jessica when she caught sight of me that anchored me back into reality. "Glad you came," she said, her smile tight and rehearsed, a contrast to the joyous atmosphere surrounding her. I nodded, feeling every moment stinging. Just when I was about to retreat to the bar, Daniel's laughter cut through the noise, a warm ember in the chilly distance. I stepped forward instinctively, drowning my insecurities in that familiar sound. The evening unfolded like a slow, painful dance. Each conversation felt like a tightrope walk, balanced between civility and rising tension. I could see Daniel start to look wearier as the hours ticked by, and I wondered if he, too, felt the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, he found me by the appetizer table, his eyes searching mine for solace. "Let's step outside," he suggested, and his voice was firm, like a lifebuoy in a storm. We walked into the cool evening, the world outside humming softly, and I felt my shoulders drop just a bit. "I don't want to keep feeling like this," he confessed, hands tucked into his pockets, staring at the ground. "Being here, it's exhausting." My heart quickened. "So, what do we do about that?" I asked, feeling both terrified and relieved at the possibility of us figuring this out together. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the chaos of the wedding faded into the background. "I guess we just need to make sure we don't lose what we've built," he said, his tone rich with resolve. The wedding buzzed behind us, merging into a muffled noise as I grasped the gravity of his words. We were two ships navigating our way through a stormy sea of familial expectations, and I couldn't help but feel hope blooming between us like wildflowers through a crack in the pavement. As the night unfolded, we exchanged glances and quiet smiles, little reminders that we had each other's backs. I still wasn't sure what the future held for us or how our relationship with Jessica would settle, but I knew that we'd face it side by side. I felt that old familiar warmth during the highs and gathered strength through the lows, knowing I could lean on him. Whatever we faced next, it was no longer just about a wedding, it was about us, and we were determined to weather the storm together. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a slow unraveling of both my anxiety and a tightening embrace of hope. Andy and I spent countless evenings discussing how to approach Jessica and her family, who traditionally wreathed their gatherings in an air of perfection. I often found myself lost in thought, worrying about every possible scenario. Would they even accept our presence after everything? Would he apologize and then be surprised by my hesitance? Nearly every night, I'd stare at the stars outside our window, trying to find answers in their distant flickers. Despite all the chaos, we managed to carve out moments of sheer joy amid the uncertainty. One Saturday, we decided to go on an impromptu hike, a little trail leading to a view we'd stumbled upon during one of our earlier adventures. There, on that sun-drenched mountaintop, it felt like our worries didn't matter quite as much. We laughed as we recounted the time we got lost for hours during a camping trip. He grinned, the way he always did when he was being playful, and nudged me, reminding me he would always choose me over getting lost, even if it meant wandering off the path sometimes. "Together, right?" he asked, a spark of purpose filling his gaze. "Always," I assured him, even as my heart fluttered with the weight of the journey ahead. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, anxiety slithered back into my mind, weaving itself around my thoughts like a vine. I spent the morning getting ready, choosing a dress that felt right, not too elaborate, just enough to reflect my genuine self. In the mirror, I didn't quite recognize the woman looking back at me. She seemed so resolute yet fragile, a juxtaposition that mirrored the entire situation at hand. I felt the gravel of apprehension in my throat as we made our way to the venue, Andy's hand warm in mine, grounding me amidst my swirling thoughts. As we stepped into the extravagant hall filled with laughter and happiness, I could feel the tension coiling tight within me. Andy and I exchanged small talk about the decorations, the floral arrangements bursting with color that made everything feel vibrant, yet every cheerful sound felt like it was humming with an undercurrent of dread. We shared a few awkward smiles with family members who seemed blissfully unaware of the backstory. And there was Jessica, radiant and graceful, a fairy tale figure enveloped in a gown. My heart softened for a split second, until reality nudged me back awake. It was still a wedding marred by complexities. Before long, Jessica caught sight of us. Her expression shifted, and for just a heartbeat, I saw the flicker of worry dance across her features. But she turned her head away quickly, adjusting her attention to a friend beside her. My heart sank for both of us. She had a lot on her mind, and I knew our past might become an unwanted guest at this celebration. I glanced at Andy, who was watching me closely, and I decided to breathe through the moment. "We'll be okay, right?" I whispered, even though I was unsure myself. He nodded, determination lighting up his eyes, as if to say that we were in this together despite the storm brewing around us. As the night unfolded, we shared glances, laughter, and moments that made me realize how deeply we were connected. Our table found itself surrounded by family that was surprisingly warm and welcoming. A cousin of ours asked about how we'd been, easing me back into comfortable conversation. I felt a smile tugging at my lips as I recalled our recent adventures, the way Andy rolled his eyes good-naturedly when I dragged him to yet another gallery exhibit. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, Jessica lingered like the ghost of unspoken words. Then it happened. Midway through dinner, Andy excused himself to head to the restroom. I hadn't meant to, but my eyes sought out Jessica across the room, and to my surprise, she was looking at me. Caught in that moment, I felt something shift, something different from before. No anger, just a curiously soft vulnerability. Perhaps we could bridge this gap. With hesitant steps, I made my way through the crowd, threading between joyful laughter and sweet reminiscences. "Jessica," I said softly when I finally stood in front of her, "can we talk?" Her smile faltered for an instant, but she nodded, the two of us moving away from the merriment. I could sense the weight of this moment, how years of tension coiled around us, waiting for an opening. "I didn't expect you guys to come," she said, the warmth in her tone stripped back, revealing an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. Did she feel trapped by our past? "Yeah, well, neither did we," I admitted, a nervous laugh slipping out. "But here we are. Together." The honesty in my voice felt like a lifeline thrown across treacherous waters. It's not that I don't care about you both. It's complicated," she murmured, her eyes locking onto mine, vulnerability spilling out in waves. We stood there for a moment surrounded by distant laughter, two estranged sisters-in-law searching for a thread of connection amidst a tapestry of family history. In those seconds, I realized that this was the start, not just for her, but for us. It wasn't about solving everything in a single conversation, it was about acknowledging our shared past, our painful scars, and learning to move forward, slowly but surely. No matter how clumsy it felt, we could try. "Complicated is okay," I said, almost surprised by my own words. "What's important is what we choose to do next." For a moment, it was just silence between us, more welcoming than an embrace. And as she nodded, I felt a cautious yet promising warmth begin to bloom in that space, like the first signs of spring pushing their way through a winter-frosted earth. Whatever happened next would be fraught with challenges, but Andy and I had already navigated this intricate path. All we needed was faith in the footsteps ahead of us. And in that warm ambience enveloped by festivity, I believed we might just find our way towards healing together.